So I opened my eyes, and the first thing I noticed was that my head felt like it had been used as a drum by someone who genuinely hated rhythm. Above me, crooked on top of some ancient courtyard gate, hung a plaque with barely legible characters. White Lotus Peak. I coughed, tasted blood, and muttered the name like it was a punchline. Because apparently, that was where I had transmigrated. One of the 72 outer peaks of the Heavenly Cloud Sect. The place wasn't exactly ruined. Jade tiles, carved beams, layered pavilions, the whole deal. But years of neglect had dulled everything down. It was like a sword left in its sheath so long it forgot it was supposed to be sharp. The Heavenly Cloud Sect itself stretched across several mountain ranges, over 200,000 disciples, majestic peaks piercing the heavens, flying swords streaking across the skies. Compared to that, White Lotus Peak was the sect's forgotten garage. I tried to sit up. Chest throbbed. Head pounded. Blood dripped from the corner of my mouth. Charming. According to the fragments of memory that had just crash-landed into my brain, I was Su Ming, 24 years old, orphan, taken in by the sect as a kid, became nothing more than a handyman disciple. Years of scrubbing floors, chopping wood, and cooking porridge, and somehow, some way, I ended up as Peak Master. My mouth twitched. Acting Peak Master, technically. White Lotus Peak had once had a real master, the reclusive Elder Xian. But the sect's soul hall had declared him dead. His soul flame had gone dark. By sect rules, a successor had to be appointed. And before vanishing, the old man, in his infinite wisdom, had chosen the most pitiful servant disciple to inherit his legacy. Why? No one knew. Maybe he pitied me. Maybe he wanted to spite the other elders. Or maybe he just dumped responsibility onto the first breathing body he saw on the peak. Either way, the outcome was the same. And the worst part was that I was still on the clock. On paper, a peak master stood equal to the heads of the 72 outer peaks. In reality, I was the crippled master of an incomplete inheritance, ranked just above the outer disciples. The sect had given me 5 years to reach core formation. Fail, and I would be stripped of the title and tossed back among the ordinary disciples. 4.5 of those 5 years had already vanished. My cultivation was foundation establishment, but my foundation was a hollow mess, built on piles of low-grade herbs and cheap pills my master had left behind. Meridians clogged with impurities. Chi flow unstable. One reckless attempt at breaking through had ended in backlash and death. That was when I opened my eyes in this body, only to find myself already on the verge of dying. Again. Great. Other transmigrators get cheats and beauties. I got a crippled body and a notice period. As I calmed down, I looked inward. My dantian was already collapsing. My heartbeat quickened, and then, in the darkness of my sea of consciousness, there it was. A lantern. Ancient, dull. And somehow, I knew exactly what it was, what it could do, and how to use it. My golden finger. My cheat. I made my choice. Either I die now, or I die trying. Grinding my teeth, I guided my chi toward the lantern and ignited it. A single white spark flashed in the dark, sending silent ripples through my consciousness. Then everything exploded. The agony was extreme. My veins screamed, my bones cracked, my heart pounded like it was trying to escape. It was like being burned alive from the inside out. And then light. A soft white glow surged through me, spreading into every corner of my body. My clogged meridians sizzled as years of filth and pill poison burned away. My collapsing dantian steadied, purified, and became crystal clear. I collapsed to the floor, drenched in sweat and foul black sludge, but alive. For a moment, I just lay there, gasping, my entire body trembling. Then the realization hit me. My meridians were clear. Almost all the impurities that had suffocated my cultivation were gone, incinerated by the lantern's flame. Even the remnants of cheap pills and half-digested herbs had been refined into pure essence. It was like being reborn. My dantian, once on the verge of collapse, now pulsed with steady vitality. My chi flowed smoothly, alive, vibrant. Compared to the body that had dragged its owner through years of mediocrity, this felt like a miracle. But miracles came with a price. I probed deeper and froze. My cultivation had dropped a full stage, all the way down to the 8th stage of chi condensation. Worse still, I could feel something else. My lifespan had been shaved away. This was the lantern's first function. A mystical white flame that cleansed and purified, but it cost me years of my life. The lantern remained in my sea of consciousness, glowing faintly, innocent as a nightlight. Then my vision changed. The cracked rice jar in the corner shimmered brown, its weak points lined like veins. The rotten beams above glimmered gray with decay. My own hands faintly glowed silver. Fragile, but steady. I could see the essence of things. This was the lantern's second function. Eye of the essence. A mystical sight that pierced illusions, revealing the truth beneath, laying bare the essence of all things. As I steadied my breathing, a soft white halo spread through my mind, warm and gentle. The crimson cloud mantra scroll that had always looked like a messy, tangled puzzle now unfolded line by line, clear as if written in daylight. My thoughts sharpened. Insights bloomed like sparks in the dark. Cultivation that had once been a struggle suddenly felt natural. Third function. A halo of insight, boosting perception, comprehension, and enlightenment. So my golden finger was a lantern with 3 tricks. A flame that cleanses, eyes that see essence, and a halo that sharpens the mind. I chuckled dryly. Not bad. Expensive, but not bad. Then the banging started. 2 outer sect disciples kicked the doors open, grinning like hyenas, and tossed a sack of moldy rice and a jar of cloudy water onto the floor. That was my monthly supply. They told me, coated in mockery, that with no disciples, no prestige, and no future, even the kitchens got more. I understood the situation. These 2 weren't just petty bullies. They were underlings of senior brother Lu, whose shadow loomed over White Lotus Peak like a storm cloud. And I was the target. I remembered the previous Su Ming, the one who had inherited this peak. A timid man, but one with quite the spine. He'd been ridiculed, belittled, pushed around. But after being chosen as Elder Xian's disciple, something had ignited in him. A spark of ambition. A hope that maybe he could prove himself. I made a silent promise. Not to anyone alive, not aloud. Just to the shadow of the Su Ming who had been there before me. Now that I had inherited his body, his struggles, I would make his dreams come true. Consider it a debt I owed him. Even in my previous life, I had never tolerated nonsense. I was the office worker who once slapped a resignation onto his manager's desk without a second thought. That same refusal to accept rubbish ran through me now. They laughed all the way down the mountain. Trash peak. Trash master. I rubbed my temples. First day in this world, and I was already a joke. But I knew the truth. Back when Elder Xian was alive, the deliveries had been entirely different. Spiritual rice, mystical fruits, fresh herbs, spirit wine, pills, materials, even spirit stones. Now, nothing. The moment my master disappeared, the respect vanished too. I sighed. Complaining was pointless. This was a true cultivation world where strength was everything. Even if those outer disciples were weaker than me, they had backing. I didn't. That made all the difference. Then I found an envelope tucked inside the sack. A decree from the Heavenly Cloud Sect. In 1 month, the disciple recruitment ceremony would be held. All 9 inner peaks and 72 outer peaks were required to be present. And attached to it, a special note. White Lotus Peak was required to recruit at least 1 disciple during the ceremony, due to the current vacancy and repeated negligence. My hands tightened on the letter. The timing was obvious. The sect had given White Lotus Peak its grace period. Without Elder Xian, without disciples, without prestige, the peak was just wasted space. And the sect had no room for sentimentality. I stared at the lantern glowing faintly in my mind. Against the vastness of the sect, against the immensity of a world split into 5 continents, my chances were laughable. But so what? Setbacks never beat me down. They only steeled my resolve. Fine. Lampy was my only hope now. Let's go get ready to recruit a disciple next month. I would show them what happens when you underestimate an overworked office worker who had binge-read far too many cultivation web novels. The shabby hall of White Lotus Peak was silent, broken only by my shallow breathing. I sat cross-legged. The scroll of the Crimson Flame mantra spread before me. Not the original fragment, but with Elder Xian's dense annotations and insights, scribbled in elegant but heavy-handed calligraphy. The true torn page, the source of the mantra, had long been taken away by the master himself. What remained were only interpretations, layers upon layers of metaphors. Dragons swallowing the moon, phoenixes reborn in heaven's fire, mountains breathing the essence of the cosmos. A lifetime of a nascent soul expert's reflections. In the past, the old Su Ming had swallowed cheap pills, forced qi through clogged meridians, and tried to brute force mastery. He failed spectacularly. But now I had something else. A faint, steady glow in my mind, the lantern halo, guiding me. I traced the characters carefully. Flame is life. It is born in weakness, made strong by rhythm, and dies in stagnation. The insight hit me like a wave. The first chapter wasn't about fire. It was about breathing, qi, life itself. You could not force it. You could not rush it. You nurtured it, allowed it to rise, and fed it patiently. I muttered under my breath as I activated the faint halo. As the phoenix rises, so must qi spiral. Heaven above, earth below, the stars dance in harmony. Ridiculous, completely absurd, and yet somehow profound. Dragons, phoenixes, heaven and earth. How does this even make any sense? With the halo guiding me, I drew in a deep breath. I circulated my qi slowly, carefully, as the halo pulsed faintly in my mind. 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3 cycles. By the 100th cycle, I reached the peak of the 8th stage of qi condensation, a level the old Su Ming had struggled to achieve previously. For a brief moment, warmth bloomed in my dantian, steady and rhythmic. Qi flowed like molten fire through clean meridians. The halo continued its gentle pulse, whispering subtle insights. My thoughts danced between the metaphors and my own reasoning. Flame is birth. Flame is rhythm. Flame is life. Breath is flame. Flame is breath. My body shook, sweat poured, and blood trickled from the corner of my mouth. I didn't stop. I had inherited memories. I knew the limits of my body, the approximate cycle counts, the stages of cultivation. But nothing could truly prepare me for the intensity of the first 1,000 cycles. By the next 100th cycle, I could feel a faint halo of warmth expanding outward. Not wild, not chaotic, but alive, breathing, connected. I whispered fragments of the scroll as the mystical nonsense became practical insight. Heaven above, earth below, phoenix and dragon, life and death. All metaphors, all teaching the flow. It was hilarious, ridiculous, but also true. Cycle after cycle, I refined my control. 20, 50, 100. 1,000 cycles later, I reached the 9th stage. I exhaled warm breath, leaning back against the cold stone wall. My dantian throbbed, my veins carried the clean qi, my lungs burned from the exertion. But I could feel something profound. The contents of the Crimson Flame mantra were no longer on paper. They had become a part of me, etched into my bones, my muscles, my very breath. After hours of rest, with muscles still trembling, I took a deep, steadying breath. I circulated my qi again, fully trusting the halo. Every inhale stoked the fire, every exhale fed it. I pushed through another 1,000 cycles, slow, methodical, deliberate. I reached the 10th stage of the qi condensation realm. But I wanted to break through. Scarlet light erupted from my body. Not wild, not chaotic. Rhythmic. Each pulse matched my breathing, each wave steady as the rise and fall of a flame. My ruined foundation shattered, then rebuilt itself layer by layer. Cracks sealed, fractures smoothed, everything reforged into something pure. My body convulsed, muscles trembling as the fires surged through me. I gritted my teeth, breath ragged, yet the rhythm of qi never broke. A faint glow spread across my skin, crimson light rising like a quiet flame. It flared once, steady and controlled, then slowly dimmed, sinking back into my dantian. As I sat there, trembling, drenched in sweat and blackened filth, the scroll's faded metaphors returned to me. The dragon coils in the abyss, awaiting the breath of heaven. The phoenix sings, its fire kindled by the world's essence. Earth bears, heaven shelters, flame is born between the two. I let out a hoarse chuckle. Dragons, phoenixes, heaven, and earth. Elder Xian really knew how to hype up a breathing exercise. Yet beneath the sarcasm, the truth pulsed in my chest. Breath became flame. Flame became qi. And qi, when guided with rhythm instead of brute force, had reforged my very core. A new clarity stirred. My affinity with flame was sharper than ever, my understanding of the mantra deeper than before. The halo above me dimmed slowly. My body was weak, but my dantian was clear, stable, and whole. A perfect foundation. Flawless. unshakable. For the first time since stepping onto White Lotus Peak, I closed my eyes not in despair, but in quiet certainty. The next thing on my agenda was the sword. Beside me lay a simple, cold steel sword, standard issue for any Sect disciple. And beside it, the cloud-chasing sword technique scroll, thin, frayed at the edges, but still intact. I remembered picking it out of the library years ago when Elder Xian had escorted me there. Not rare or flashy. One of the Sect's foundational manuals, a technique built to teach discipline and flow. The Heavenly Cloud Sect was vast. 9 inner peaks, 72 outer peaks. Each inner peak specialized in its own Tao. The 4th inner peak, Sword Peak, was the Sect's blade. Its current master, Elder Jianhong, was a saint-ranked swordsman, a name carried in reverence and fear. Compared to that, I was still fumbling at the basics. The path of mastery was divided into 4 grades: beginner, small achievement, great achievement, and finally perfection. It was no different from cultivation itself. Realms divided into major ranks, each subdivided into 10 minor stages: mortal, mystic, saint, and higher. Elder Xian had once been a nascent soul expert, the very peak of the mystic realm, before he disappeared. The 9 inner peak masters were all at the saint level at a minimum. As for the Sect master, rumors placed him far beyond even that. I yawned. I wanted to dive into the scroll right away, but exhaustion tugged at my body. A full day in a new world, reforging my foundation, being roasted alive once already. Even transmigrators need sleep. After tidying my quarters, I dug out the last of my spiritual fruits and boiled rice from the cleaner portion of my rations. No mold tonight. I ate quietly, then collapsed into bed. The next day, dawn spilled across White Lotus Peak, painting the courtyard in gold. I washed, stretched, and sat beneath the lantern's faint halo. My chi cycled smoothly. By the time I finished my morning cultivation, I had already advanced to the 2nd stage of foundation establishment. After bathing, I drew my sword and unrolled the scroll. For movements were recorded on its frayed pages. Cloud step slash, a flowing downward cut, soft at first, hard at the end. Drifting cloud thrust, a piercing thrust, balanced between speed and stability. Cloud veil spiral, a defensive sweep, redirecting force like mist. Coiling serpent strike, a sudden twist, explosive release. For strokes, simple on the surface. Yet together, they formed a style meant to adapt, shift, and survive. Like drifting clouds that could gather into storms, like a serpent waiting to become a dragon. I tightened my grip on the blade. A mortal-grade technique, but not worthless. I activated the lantern's halo. White light shimmered faintly within me, pressing clarity into my thoughts. My first swings were slow, deliberate, my body adjusting to the rhythm the halo imposed. The cloud-chasing sword was not a brute force style. It flowed, it absorbed, it turned weakness into opportunity. Each motion transitioned seamlessly into the next. Each defense could shift into a strike. Where other styles sought dominance, this one sought survival. I muttered between swings, half reciting, half laughing at myself. Clouds rise, clouds scatter. The serpent coils, the serpent strikes. Even weakness can wait for the right wind. My sword cut the morning air. Slash. Thrust. Spiral. Strike. My breath moved with the blade. My chi, faint but steady, flowed along with each cut, guided by the lantern's glow. But the halo wasn't free. Every moment it brightened, it drew more chi from me. If I pushed it too far, I could feel the thread of my lifespan tug tighter. Still, I pressed on. Sweat ran down my arms. Muscles trembled. My grip faltered. But I didn't stop until I had cycled through the sequence again and again. Finally, panting, I lowered the blade. The halo dimmed, leaving the courtyard silent once more. Beginner's stage, but stable. At this pace, small achievement wasn't far. It would be easy to credit the lantern. But deep down, I knew better. The muscle memory of 5 years swinging this exact technique was carved into the old Su Ming's bones. He might have lacked talent, but he had not lacked discipline. Every day, rain or shine, humiliation or loneliness, he had practiced. The lantern illuminated the flaws, yes, but the foundation was already there. Without it, no amount of cheats would have helped. I rolled my sore shoulders. Guess it wasn't all wasted after all. The old me wasn't talentless, just unlucky. The days slipped by in silence. Each morning, I sat cross-legged beneath the lantern's halo, guiding chi and flame through my meridians until sweat drenched my back and black filth seeped from my pores. Each evening, I stood in the courtyard, steel sword in hand, repeating the 4 forms of the cloud-chasing sword. By the end of the first week, my cultivation had climbed to the 3rd stage of foundation establishment, my swordsmanship steady at small achievement. By the 2nd week, my chi deepened, and my cloud veil spirals no longer faltered. They flowed like a cloud, scattering heavy strikes with ease. By the 3rd week, the sword no longer felt like an external tool. It moved with me, coiling and thrusting on instinct, like a serpent waiting to strike. And by the 4th week, I stood at the 8th stage of foundation establishment. My sword mastery had just stepped into great achievement, each swing carrying the weight of clouds gathering before a storm. Yet even as my cultivation rose and my swordsmanship sharpened, my thoughts kept circling back to something else. The lotus. I remembered it clearly. Years ago, Elder Xian had conjured a lotus made of white fire that seemed to silence the entire peak. It wasn't just power. It was presence. The image of purity and authority etched deep into the old Su Ming's memory. Even now, recalling it gave me chills. With my improved affinity for flame chi, I tried to mimic it. Chi into flame, flame into shape. The result was cabbage. Sometimes a shaky half-lotus, trembling before collapsing. Sometimes just a smoldering mess. Even with the lantern's faint blessing, the petals refused to hold. I sighed but refused to quit. The white lotus was more than a technique. It was a symbol. If I could stand before the sect and make them believe, even for a heartbeat, that white lotus peak still lived, that would be enough. Soon, the day before the disciple recruitment ceremony arrived. White Lotus Peak was quiet as always. Only my lone figure could be seen practicing the cloud-chasing sword technique as streaks of cloud chi flashed before vanishing. Then, a faint sound broke the silence. A figure in plain gray robes was climbing the stone path, every step steady and unhurried. No ornaments, no treasures, yet the air itself seemed to bend around her. Elder Qingya, my master's Tao companion, a woman I had only met 3 times in my life. I hurried to receive her, cupping my hands, bowing deeply. Disciple pays respect to the elder. When she reached me, she didn't speak at once. She only watched. Her gaze was calm, but it stripped me bare in an instant, as if she could see the old cracks in my foundation, my patched-together confidence, and the new person hidden beneath. Finally, she said my swordplay had spirit now. Elder Xian would have been pleased. I stiffened, unsure how to reply. I forced out a dry chuckle and said I would take that as proof I hadn't embarrassed my master completely. Her eyes softened, just barely. She told me I didn't have Elder Xian's talent, didn't have his strength, but I had something notable. Patience, persistence, and flames that refused to die. The words pierced deeper than I wanted them to. I lowered my head, hoping she wouldn't notice the tremor in my hands. Elder Qingya turned toward the crooked plaque of White Lotus Peak. Her voice, usually calm, wavered faintly. This place was his heart. Even if the sect forgot, she could not. When she looked back, her gaze held me like iron. Tomorrow, they would judge me not as Elder Xian's successor, but as myself. If White Lotus Peak was to stand, let it stand on my will. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat tightened. Warmth was a foreign experience in my world, and it never stayed long. Yet here she was. Someone who cared, if only a little, if only because of my master. And it was enough to stir something inside me. I bowed deeply, my voice low, almost hoarse. Thank you, Elder. I would not shame his legacy. For a heartbeat, her gaze lingered. Then she gave the smallest nod. Good. And just like that, she turned and left, her plain robes vanishing into the mist. I stood frozen long after she was gone. I wanted to laugh, to say something ridiculous to lighten the mood, to break the weight in my chest. But my eyes burned, and for once, I didn't fight it. Damn it, I whispered, swiping at my face with my sleeve. The next morning, mist rolled down White Lotus Peak as I descended the stone steps. Plain white robes fluttering faintly in the breeze. I carried only the acting peak master's jade token and the cold steel sword at my waist. By the time I reached the Heavenly Cloud Sect's Grand Plaza, the air itself seemed to tremble. Last-minute preparations for the disciple recruitment ceremony were already in full swing. The sight nearly stole my breath. The grand recruitment arena was carved into the mountainside. A colossal jade platform floated at its center, upon which sat the sect leader's throne, empty for now, draped in gold and white banners. Beneath it, 9 thrones curved in a semicircle, each reserved for the inner peak masters. 72 smaller seats stretched in rows, belonging to the outer peak masters. Around the arena, countless disciples gathered. The inner sect stood in neat, disciplined formations, sharp as blades, while the outer sect lingered at the edges, permitted only to observe. Even with memories of 2 lifetimes, I couldn't help but feel awed. I muttered under my breath that I had really walked into a Xianxia novel. And yet, as I moved through the crowd, whispers chased me like shadows. Is that him? White Lotus Peak's acting master. More like caretaker. Can't even reach core formation. Poor Elder Xian. I kept my expression calm, though inside I wanted to smack those disciples across the back of the head. I walked steadily, not soaring grandly like the other elders, not wrapped in dazzling chi like the geniuses. Just one step at a time, almost unnoticed, until I reached the seat reserved for the master of White Lotus Peak. As a foundation establishment cultivator, I could have flown on a sword. But thanks to my generous master Xian, I didn't own one. Nor did I have a storage ring. Imagine that. The protagonist of a cultivation novel, and not even a storage ring. So I walked. A seat remained empty beside Elder Qingya of Azure Bamboo Peak. I approached, bowing lightly before her. Instead of sitting, I stood behind the chair, straight-backed, not claiming what was not yet his. Elder Qingya's sharp eyes flicked toward me. For the briefest moment, her serene mask cracked, a faint glimmer of approval surfacing. You've grown, Su Ming. I bowed again, voice steady. This disciple greets elder. Her disciple, a proud young woman in green, sneered at me, unimpressed. Qingya said nothing more. Her silence carried both aloofness and subtle concern. Afterward, I bowed to the other peak masters as they arrived. My movements were measured, respectful, not ostentatious, but deliberate enough to be acknowledged. Then, with my hands clasped behind my back, I settled into quiet observation, eyes sweeping across the sea of disciples and recruits below. The skies above the grand plaza darkened as a colossal flying boat descended from the clouds. Its hull gleamed like polished jade, inscribed with flowing golden dragon runes that pulsed in harmony with heaven and earth. The sheer aura of the vessel pressed upon the gathered crowd, and silence swept across the square. There stood Sect Master June, draped in silver and azure, his robes flowing like storm clouds. His gaze was calm, yet fathomless, carrying the weight of 1,000 storms. Even without a word, his presence commanded reverence. 2 of his personal disciples followed at his side. The sound of a bell reverberated. An elder in ceremonial robes stepped forward and declared the final stage of the disciple recruitment ceremony had begun. Over the past month, over 10,000 children had been tested. Now, the remaining 1,000 stood before the assembled elders, the chosen few, each bearing rare talent, worthy to be handpicked. A cheer rose, echoing against the mountain walls. I folded my arms. So these were the elites, huh? Names were called one by one, and children stepped forward. Peak masters raised their hands, marking their interest. The process was elegant, efficient. Children of talent and potential snapped up like treasures. Then came the stir in the crowd. Lin Yueying. A girl stepped forward, her presence chilling the air like a frost-laden breeze. Even from a distance, her posture was impeccable, every movement precise, every glance sharp. I felt the subtle weight of extraordinary talent radiating from her. Whispers spread quickly. That was Princess Lin Yueying of the Lin clan. Her family's prestige rivaled half the northern territories. She had awakened a rare bloodline at an unusually young age. Her potential was said to surpass even seasoned inner disciples. No question, the sect master himself would recruit her. Curiosity pricked me. Extending my perception, I activated my essence sight. Instantly, the flow of information in the arena struck me like a crashing wave. Dozens of prodigies, elders, and disciples pulsed around me. But one stream stood out, cold and brilliant, impossible to ignore. I forced my focus, isolating it. There it was, a soft, icy blue glow emanating from the girl, pure and intense. As I concentrated further, a vision coalesced in my mind. A frost phoenix, wings unfurling in shimmering ice, talons gleaming with frozen light. So this is why everyone was watching. The girl was not just a prodigy. She carried a heavenly bloodline. The frost phoenix bloodline promised potential far beyond ordinary cultivators. A sudden hush fell over the hall as Sect leader Jun began his descent from his floating throne, bathed in soft azure light. His presence radiated calm authority, commanding attention without a single gesture. He spoke directly to the girl, asking if she would be willing to be his personal disciple. She bowed gracefully and accepted. Calm, composed, resolute. As Lin Yueying, the Frost Phoenix girl, was escorted to her new peak, the hall buzzed with whispered admiration. I folded my arms, letting the spectacle wash over me. Around me, dozens of other disciples were being taken by their respective elders. Some talented, some merely lucky enough to catch an elder's eye. I observed silently, noting their auras and potential. Most were already recognized prodigies. Only a handful had the potential to truly leave a mark. But reality was clear. Every elder's gaze was locked on the brightest prospects. My essence vision had flagged more than a dozen candidates with good potential, but each time, one elder or another already claimed them. My confidence did not blind me. I knew my standing perfectly. Acting peak master or not, I was still unproven. Forget inner peaks. Many outer peaks saw me as nothing more than a caretaker for a dying White Lotus peak. The ceremony dragged on as the remaining candidates were picked over. Some elders lost interest, deeming them mediocre. Others hesitated, weighing potential. I waited. I leaned slightly forward, careful not to draw attention, eyes scanning the hall with quiet patience. I had already identified several promising prospects with my essence sight, but one after another, they had been claimed by other elders. I knew I had no other option. An acting peak master with no disciples, no prestige. I would not be able to snatch them from the hands of the giants. Then the elder called a name. Lin Yao. A slender girl stepped forward. I noticed her immediately. Elders glanced at her, uninterested. Elderly of Azure Peak frowned and said the talent was there, but nothing remarkable. She wouldn't make an impact among the prodigies. Whispers began to ripple through both elders and disciples. She was already 15, with no cultivation. How did she even manage the earlier trials? If she started this late, catching up would be nearly impossible. An elder with folded arms shook his head and said she had weak roots. Even if it sprouted, it would never bear fruit. Elder Fong of Crimson Peak agreed. Perhaps in 10 years, she could qualify as an inner disciple. For now, outer disciple was all she deserved. Elder Yi refused to take her, saying he would not waste his resources. One by one, elders voiced their judgments. Not enough potential. Too ordinary. Each word seemed to strike harder than the last, and though Lin Yao's shoulders trembled and her grip on the sword tightened, she clenched her jaw, forcing herself to endure in silence. My gaze sharpened. I quietly activated my essence sight. For a heartbeat, I almost missed it. A faint light pulsed within her, a dark yet fiery glow. A subtle flicker within the void. Interesting. An aura like the Frost Phoenix girl's, yet something was different. Something dormant, perhaps. The elder on stage sighed and told her to move to the outer disciple section. The girl froze. The words cut deep, but the fire in her eyes refused to die. I thought back to what I could see of her story through the situation. She had survived something terrible. That kind of resolve didn't come from nothing. She had fought desperately, survived where no one else had. Alone, scarred, abandoned. She had buried her parents and siblings with her own hands, swearing never to be powerless again. That vow carried her here. And now, all these rejections threatened to push back that resolve. I stepped forward. Calm. Deliberate. The word rang out like a clear bell. Wait. All eyes turned to me. I extended my palm and said I was Su Ming, acting peak master of White Lotus Peak. I asked if she was willing to be my disciple. The girl's eyes widened, disbelief and hope warring in her chest. Her body trembled. She stepped forward with resolve. This was her one chance to rise, to ensure no one she loved would ever be lost again. She said she was willing. Whispers rippled through the vast hall. White Lotus Peak. Isn't that the dead peak? Hopeless. That girl is ruined. There were far better candidates with good potential, yet I set my eyes on her. Perhaps out of pity. Or perhaps White Lotus Peak had already given up. An elder sneered that she should have accepted becoming an outer disciple. Better that than tying herself to a caretaker with no future. The words weren't random. They were deliberate jabs, meant for all to hear. Lin Yao's face paled, while I only stood calmly, arms folded, as if the entire hall were beneath my notice. Did I make the wrong choice? Doubt flickered in her eyes as whispers gnawed at her resolve. But the mockery didn't end with the disciples. From the elders' seats, a cold voice cut through. Elder Rin of Thunder Peak said a caretaker dares to recruit. White Lotus Peak has already fallen. This charade must end. Elder Fong of Crimson Peak nodded in agreement. They couldn't waste sect resources on a peak with neither disciples nor a future. Murmurs of agreement rose among the elders. Each word was a knife, not toward me alone, but toward Elder Xian's legacy. Yet not all joined the chorus. Elder Qingya's soft voice broke through the noise. White Lotus Peak was entrusted to Elder Xian. Even in death, his will deserved respect. Su Ming was chosen as the successor. Were they to dishonor his judgment now? Another elder stroked his beard and agreed. By sect rules, I had the right to choose her as a disciple. Yet beneath my calm exterior, my mind raced. None of this was a coincidence. Over the past month, I had tested not only the limits of my strength, but also the limits of my authority and how to take advantage of it carefully. Yes, I possessed a secret artifact that aided my comprehension, but it couldn't summon spirit stones or fill empty jars of herbs directly. Even though the Heavenly Cloud sect was rich, resources assigned to the outer peaks were limited. I had to struggle like any other disciple, competing for every scrap. So today, I played my only card in front of everyone. I could not afford to appear weak. The title of acting peak master was meager, but it carried a sliver of authority, just enough to bear results, if wielded correctly. The debate grew loud, dividing the hall. Elders sneered, disciples whispered, and every gaze turned toward me. Then, from above, descended the sect master himself. Jun Tianya, leader of the Heavenly Cloud sect, floated down, robes of silver and azure flowing like storm clouds. His eyes were as deep as the endless skies, and his presence alone silenced the hall. He looked directly at me. White Lotus Peak. His voice was calm, but each word struck like thunder. He asked if I truly wished to take her as my disciple, and if I believed I could uphold Elder Xian's legacy. The world seemed to hold its breath. Even Lin Yao shrank back, her hand tightening around her sword. I bowed respectfully and said yes. Then I stood tall and extended the note that came with my invitation. Inside, my lips curled. Previously, I had suspected that the note might not be an official instruction, and from the reactions of the elders, it had almost assured me of my suspicion. I had decided. If I was going down, I was sinking the entire ship. The sect master was known for his righteousness, and I wanted to use that. Even with the extreme difference in status and power, with this move, I got a direct audience with the sect leader in front of the biggest audience possible. I said clearly that with the least resources and support, I had still reached foundation establishment. Sure, the foundation establishment realm was nothing much, but my current cultivation, already at the late stages before the age of 30, placed me on the same level as many of the better inner disciples. But becoming an elder was another matter altogether. To hold that title, one needed to be at the core formation realm at the least. And to become a peak master required more than cultivation. It demanded contributions and recognition within the sect. A stir swept the hall. Murmurs broke out. With a sharp tone, I continued. It was true that since Elder Xian's passing, provisions had been not quite up to the mark. Surely an administrative oversight. I was just about to visit the provision hall to collect what was promised. With interest, I hoped. Laughter rippled among the disciples before being silenced by the elders' glares. But the jab had landed perfectly. I continued. White Lotus Peak may look abandoned, but I had no intention of giving up. 5 years was the time that was promised. Now 5 months remained. Within due time, I would meet the sect's expectations. And I assumed by that time no one would raise any objection regarding my qualifications. A collective gasp erupted. To speak to the sect master this way. How arrogant. Just a handyman disciple. How dare he? Impudent. Offending the sect leader. Courting death. I let it linger before adding, voice calm, almost mocking. Even without resources, I cultivated. Even without allies, I stood my ground. If the sect wished to abandon White Lotus Peak now, so be it. That was not something I could control. The sharpness of my words stunned many into silence. Among the disciples, sneers faltered, and a few eyes flickered with awe. Behind me, Lin Yao's chest swelled with pride, her earlier despair burned away by the force of my defiance. Sect Master Jun studied me for a moment. His expression was unreadable, yet a faint glint flickered in his eyes. Approval, or perhaps curiosity. Then, without warning, a vast wave of pressure descended. His divine sense crashed upon me like a mountain, testing, probing, seeking to uncover my depths. My chest tightened, but I did not flinch. I let my cultivation flare to its fullest, meeting that pressure head-on. My goal was simple. What I needed was acknowledgement, and there was no higher stage to seize it than here. If Sect Master Jun himself recognized me, then the rest of the sect would have no choice but to yield. I was fully aware that before Sect Master Jun, I was nothing more than a mosquito, perhaps even less. But that was precisely why I flared my cultivation to its fullest. If nothing else, I wanted to show that this junior still had the courage to stand tall against impossible challenges. Inside, however, I was afraid. My secret, the lantern, must not be exposed. But I had no other choice. I had to trust that it would remain hidden and that Sect Master Jun's divine sense would find nothing beyond ordinary. At last, the Sect Master gave a slow nod. Very well. 5 months. We shall see whether White Lotus Peak rises or falls with me. His gaze shifted briefly toward the nervous girl before settling firmly on me. Since I had chosen her, from this day forward, Disciple Lin Yao would be acknowledged as a disciple of White Lotus Peak under my name. But he reminded me, her future would be tied to mine. If I failed, then her fate would also be buried alongside me. I bowed deeply. This disciple thanks Sect Master for his guidance. A beat later, Lin Yao hurriedly followed, dropping into her bow. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. With a flick of his fingers, a trusted elder appeared. Elder Yu was ordered to investigate the provision hall matter. The sect master wanted to know why a disciple of his sect had not received what was due. Then Jun Tianya extended his hand, and a storage ring floated toward me. His voice dropped to a near whisper, meant only for me. Senior brother Xian once saved many disciples from a life-and-death crisis, including him. Take this, and consider that debt repaid. Then, aloud for all to hear, his tone carried the weight of command. I and my disciple could visit the central library as any other. White Lotus Peak would not be denied its place. With that, the sect master turned, robes billowing like storm clouds, and departed as gracefully as he had arrived. Both of us, the master and the disciple, bowed. For me, this time, it was a genuine gesture. Yes, I had intended to make a scene. Yes, I wanted the recognition. But the outcome surpassed even my wildest expectations. As Sect Master Jun returned to his majestic flying boat, he flicked his fingers. From the shadows, a cultivator draped in black appeared, silent as a whisper. A faint smile curved Sect Master Jun's lips. He had recognized something rare in me, and now the Heavenly Cloud Sect Shadow Squad would keep a discreet watch over White Lotus Peak. I walked at an unhurried pace, Lin Yao following half a step behind. Along the path back from the ceremony grounds, disciples and attendants parted instinctively, whispers trailing after us like shadows. I understood they had plenty to say, but after the sect master had intervened, they kept their mouths shut. Good. This was what I wanted. By the time we reached the mist-shrouded cliffs, the serene courtyard of White Lotus Peak was visible ahead. Over the past month, I had trimmed back the weeds, repaired cracked stone paths, cleared the old training platform, and tended to the lotus ponds that gave the mountain its name. It wasn't majestic, but it was better than before. Even some white cranes had started coming since last week. Lin Yao stopped for a moment, taking in the view. To her, this was going to be her future home. I led her toward the inner courtyard. The main hall of White Lotus Peak stood simple but well kept. Elder Xian, though reclusive, had never denied himself basic comfort. A number of small quarters were built apart from the main quarter. I paused before one and told her this would be her room. She bowed deeply, her eyes shining with gratitude. I was not going to let her stay in the depleted hut the old Su Ming had once used as a handyman disciple. I had to maintain a basic level of status. My expression softened just slightly before I coughed into my fist and told her to introduce herself properly. She straightened. This disciple was Lin Yao from Northwind Village. Some months ago, her village was destroyed by demonic beasts, and only she survived. She clenched her sword as she spoke. In that sense, we both shared a familiarity. She said that from this day forth, she would follow my teachings and work hard to never bring shame to White Lotus Peak. A faint smile tugged at my lips. I nodded. Good. From this day on, she was not only my disciple, but also a potential successor of this peak. As such, she was eligible to learn the inheritance of White Lotus Peak. But I would not stop her from learning more. We both followed the path of flames and swords, so I would teach her what I could. Tomorrow, we would visit the central library to gather suitable techniques for her. Until then, rest. As we stepped back into the courtyard, a familiar figure approached. Elder Qingya, her robes fluttering softly in the mountain breeze. She displayed a genuine smile and said I had done well today. For a moment, my calm mask wavered, and I returned the bow with sincerity. Today would not have been possible without her voice at the gathering. I glanced at Lin Yao and gestured toward her. This was Lin Yao, my first disciple. Lin Yao hurriedly stepped forward and dropped into a deep bow. Elder Qingya's gaze lingered on the girl for a moment before she returned her eyes to me. White Lotus Peak may yet see light again. Do not squander this chance. With that, she turned and left as swiftly as she had come. After settling Lin Yao down, I sat cross-legged inside my quiet chamber, the storage ring resting in my palm. I was eager to finally look inside. With a thread of my divine sense, I looked within, then froze. Pills, herbs, fruits, artifacts. Piles upon piles of goods stared back at me. A low-grade mystic sword carved with a coiling cloud dragon. A sleek flying sword. 50 chi condensation pills. 20 foundation building pills. 100 spirit replenishing pills. 20 healing pills. 2 low-grade marrow cleansing pills. 3 defensive talismans. And a small mountain of low-grade spirit stones. My jaw dropped. Then I let out a low chuckle. I knew the sect was rich. But this rich? My voice cracked, caught somewhere between laughter and disbelief. I silently thanked Elder Shin twice. My grin widened. Then I shook my head, muttering to myself. No, calm down. This wasn't charity. This was a payment. Sect Master Jun said it himself. Elder Shin once saved his life. This was the sect master settling an old debt, nothing more. Which meant the sect was willing to provide resources for White Lotus Peak. I had to prove myself. And if I wanted more, I would have to earn it. I exhaled slowly, lips curving into a wry smile. Good. That meant I could trust the system. At least it was fair in its own cruel way. As long as I played by its rules, there was a way forward. Still, I couldn't help it. I spread my arms wide over the glowing treasures and laughed softly. But damn, at least I didn't have to feed my first disciple moldy rice anymore. The morning air was crisp, carrying warm sunlight. I walked at the front, hands clasped behind my back, while Lin Yao followed half a step behind. Our first destination was the registration hall, where disciples came to formally inscribe their names into the sect's records. The hall was as busy as ever, bustling with new disciples guided by seniors. When Lin Yao received her sect robes and the polished jade identity token engraved with White Lotus Peak, her eyes lingered on it. To others, it might have been just a piece of jade. But for her, it was proof. She had truly become a disciple of the Heavenly Cloud sect. The day before, handyman disciples from the provision hall had delivered several carts of goods to White Lotus Peak. Bags of rice, fresh grains, dried meats, jars of spirit herbs, fruits, and even spices. For the first time in years, the empty kitchens were full, enough to last half a year. From the registration hall, we moved on to the grand library. The towering structure stood before us like a temple of knowledge, its spiraling towers stretching into the sky, mystical patterns glowing faintly across its walls. Inside, rows of shelves and jade slips stretched into the horizon. I stepped forward confidently, presenting my jade token. Greetings, Elder Yen. I had come to browse the archives. This was my first disciple, Lin Yao. The elder overseeing the library, a white-robed man with long eyebrows, studied us for a moment. He seemed to recognize us and replied with a subtle nod. Yesterday's events had clearly made an impact. I kept my posture low, bowing once more with sincerity. Elder Yin led us to the ground floor, which held shelves upon shelves of general knowledge. Sect history, cultivation basics, maps, illustrated guides to spirit and demonic beasts, and medicinal herb catalogs. I carefully scanned the contents, requesting copies of several useful scrolls. I remembered my first time setting foot here as a lowly handyman disciple. I had exchanged my hard-earned contribution points for 3 hours of study. As a handyman disciple, I couldn't leave the library with the books, so I had scribbled notes. Even now, that knowledge was helping me survive. And now look at me, walking in as an acting peak master. Life was nothing if not dramatic. Soon, we ascended to the first floor, where the true heart of mortal realm cultivation was kept. Chi condensation, foundation establishment, and core formation manuals lined the shelves. I told Lin Yao to walk around and see if anything felt right. Don't force it. Cultivation techniques weren't just about power. They carried fate. I had already made up my mind. I could never fully play the role of a lofty, all-knowing master. Still, if I couldn't explain something, I would simply call it fate. That much I could manage. Lin Yao nodded timidly and drifted among the shelves. Given that I didn't have a golden finger system that pointed out who the protagonist was, I couldn't confirm her role for certain. But her aura was eerily similar to that Frost Phoenix girl yesterday. Logically speaking, she should be destined to follow some sort of heaven's chosen template in the future as well. But that was a problem for later. Better to let fate do its thing. I turned to the shelves myself and soon found 2 sword techniques. Azure Cloud Sword Technique and Serpent Fang Sword Technique. At a glance, both looked impressive, but with the halo of insight, their inner workings became clear. Azure Cloud flowed like mist. Serpent Fang struck like a coiled viper. I took them both. Average or not, White Lotus Peak needed a collection. I moved on to spiritual techniques. Fireballs, water strikes, wind blades, and some utility techniques. The halo revealed their inner mechanics as if they were no more complicated than formulas. I took several of them. Honestly, they were no harder than algebra once you knew the method. Sadly, so many people waste their lives memorizing instead of understanding. Then, tucked between scrolls, I found something different. Phantom Sword Manifestation, a high mortal level technique that condensed chi into sword constructs. My lips curved. Now this was useful, portable, versatile, and flashy as well. In the flame section, most manuals were ordinary. Only 2 seemed somewhat special under the halo. Ember Breathing Art, a steady cultivation method, and Blazing Heart Mantra, a technique of explosive fire. I added them both. And then, among the mental arts, one more caught my eye. Tranquil Lotus Mantra, a technique to sharpen focus and perception. Perfect. I did not forget to check the dusty corners of the shelves either. After all, I had read enough web novels to know that special techniques were usually tucked away there. Sadly, I found nothing. By the second floor, restrictions grew heavier. My acting peak master token gave access only to the general knowledge section on the upper floors. Combat and cultivation techniques were locked, but theoretical texts on all 3 mystic realms were available. And that was exactly what I wanted. I activated the halo again, flipping through scroll after scroll, my mind absorbing everything. From afar, it looked absurd. A handyman turned acting peak master skimming the scrolls and books like a monkey pretending to read. Does he think cultivation is a race? Pointless. He won't remember anything. The overseeing elder frowned, but said nothing. Only I knew the truth. The halo compressed and integrated everything into my comprehension. For, maybe 5 hours later, I finally descended with a stack of jade slips and scrolls tucked into my storage ring. At the base of the library, Lin Yao was waiting. Her hands were empty, looking a bit lost. When she saw me, she lowered her head. Master, she couldn't find anything. Nothing called out to her. She knew she had failed, and she thought maybe I would be disappointed. She bit her lip, fingers tightening around her sword, then forced herself to look up. But in her eyes, there was no excuse. Only resolve. Even so, she had decided. She wanted to follow my path. Whatever path I walked, she would walk. She would work harder than anyone else, and she wouldn't falter. I blinked, then chuckled softly. I reached out and ruffled her hair. Disappointed? Never. But all right. Together, we turned back toward the mist-shrouded mountain of White Lotus Peak. Time slipped away in the quiet of White Lotus Peak. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. For the first time in years, the abandoned peak echoed with the sounds of training, study, and discipline. I began simply, teaching Lin Yao the foundations of cultivation and breathing techniques. Once her basics were clear, I introduced her to the Crimson Flame mantra, my own refined version, polished over the past month. The essence hadn't changed, but my understanding had deepened. On the second day, I gave her a portion of the items received from the Sect Master's storage ring. Among them were the low-grade marrow cleansing pills and my old practice sword. Her progress was steady. After 1 week, Lin Yao could sense qi. By the second week, she formally stepped into the qi condensation realm. I did not stay idle. I continuously observed her inner aura with my lantern's halo of insight and essence sight. Within her, faint shadows whispered. The dormant bloodline, or whatever it was, slept like an ancient beast, sealed under layers of darkness. I noted it carefully. I observed every flicker of qi and every ripple of flame, but no matter what I did, it refused to stir. I clenched my fist. I could risk it if it were me. The lantern allowed me to shave years off my lifespan and amplify its abilities. I already suspected that a decade had been shaved away just to reach my current foundation establishment realm and master the great achievement stage in my cloud-chasing sword technique. But I was not disappointed. I had lots of years to spare, and what was even the point of thinking that far ahead when my problem was only months away? But I could never gamble recklessly with my disciple's life. For now, I wanted her to cultivate naturally, so I let her progress at her own pace. I continued improving myself as well. Teaching Lin Yao the cloud-chasing sword technique went smoothly. She had some natural affinity with swords, or perhaps it was her bond with the sword she always carries. Within a month, she nearly reached the small achievement realm, which surprised me. The next month and a half, I went into seclusion. I digested every scroll I had taken from the library, filtering insights from countless techniques. They didn't transform my Crimson Flame mantra, but they exposed me to new ways and perspectives, which I incorporated into my own path. The halo worked at full capacity, linking even minor insights together, gradually shaping my unique path. At last, after unrelenting focus, I broke through to the 10th stage of foundation establishment. I stood at the final threshold. One more push, and the core formation realm would be within reach. My promise to the sect suddenly felt ordinary. I still had more than 3 months, yet I had no intention of stopping. In secret, I practiced tirelessly with the flying sword. At first clumsy, I refused to be humiliated in front of my disciple. Day after day, I practiced until I could sustain flight for hours with speed and precision. My swordplay improved as well. Gradually, I reached the peak of great achievement. And then there was the Tranquil Lotus mantra. I had underestimated it at first, but slowly realized its brilliance. Mind cultivation, like chi cultivation, also had different realms. I felt my spirit and awareness strengthen. My mental fortitude sharpened, and more importantly, I understood that this would improve my odds of breaking through to the core formation realm. 2.5 months had passed. White Lotus Peak no longer felt like a graveyard. In the courtyard, master and disciple trained together. Lin Yao had already reached the middle stages of the qi condensation realm. It had been almost 3 months since we secluded ourselves at the top of White Lotus Peak. Now I was ready. I sat cross-legged on top of a solitary cliff. The wind howled around me, carrying the scent of pine and the distant roar of waterfalls, but within me, there was only silence. My breathing slowed, aligning with the rhythm of heaven and earth. My dantian drummed with pressure, my qi compressed to its absolute limit. Yet my mind remained calm, sharpened like a blade by the Tranquil Lotus mantra. Steady, unwavering, without a ripple of doubt. For months, I had purified my body and qi with the white flames, burning away hidden impurities and refining every thread of energy. Now, that refinement had reached its peak. The qi in my meridians trembled, humming with fiery glow. My halo of insight flared, and comprehension surged like a tidal wave. Techniques, mantras, and insights, once scattered, now pieced together into a single truth. Boom! Scarlet light erupted from my core, pulsing with the rhythm of my breath. Not chaotic, not wild. Precise, deliberate, as though every move obeyed my will. It shattered the brittle shell of my old foundation as the revelation struck me like a torrential wave. Heaven breathes. Earth bears. Between the two, flames take their first breath. The dragon coils in silence, guarding the cinder of creation. The phoenix stirs, its wings birthing flame untainted, pure as dawn. When dragon and phoenix meet beneath heaven's gaze, the true flame rises, eternal and sovereign. Threads of light spiraled within me, weaving, intertwining, forming a sphere of radiance that shimmered with perfect clarity. Essence sight revealed the threads converging, compressing into a flawless crimson core that pulsed in harmony with my life force. Scarlet energy burst outward, enveloping me with an ethereal fire. A vision unfolded before my eyes. A cloud dragon coiled around an embryonic phoenix, its wings unfurling like the first light of dawn. Sparks gathered between them, forging three slender, ethereal blades that hummed with raw energy, as pure and untamed as molten flame. I reached out instinctively. The swords responded, spinning around me as extensions of my will. Their edges flickered with living fire, circling with deliberate grace. A flick of my fingers sent them racing, and the nearest peak crumbled under their destructive force. My eyes gleamed as realization struck. This was no ordinary phenomenon. This was the rarest of manifestations, a mystical ability born from a perfect breakthrough. Even among geniuses, only a few could achieve such events. This was my flame sword manifestation, the embodiment of my breakthrough, a tangible projection of my mastery over flame and swords. Core formation realm, I murmured, voice low, reverent. A smile tugged at my lips. Achieved, I gently descended into White Lotus Peak's courtyard. The echo of my breakthrough had shaken the mountain, and Lin Yao had been waiting anxiously, her eyes fixed on the skies. When the flying sword beneath my feet dissolved into sparks in midair and I landed gracefully, her surprise melted into joy. She bowed and congratulated me on my breakthrough. I nodded lightly, my expression calm as ever, but my attention immediately shifted to her cultivation. Extending my divine sense, I inspected her. She had progressed steadily, currently at the 7th stage of the Qi condensation realm, a progress most disciples could only envy. Activating my essence sight, I looked deeper. The lantern's gift had evolved since my breakthrough. What once showed me only silhouettes of essence now revealed far more details. The flows of Qi through her meridians, her dantian glowing like embers. And at her core, the familiar dark shadow remained curled in silence, showing no sign of awakening. Dormant, still sleeping. But that was fine. Disappointment never crossed my mind. Instead, I sat opposite her with a faint smile and told her I would show her the insights I gained. This time, I didn't recite analogies of heaven and earth. After explaining briefly, I raised a hand. A single finger tapped forward, and a streak of white light shot from my fingertip into Lin Yao's forehead. Her body stiffened as the streak entered her sea of consciousness, dissolving into patterns and impressions. The improved crimson flame mantra unfolded within her mind. Inside, I was ecstatic. I had always wanted to do that, flicking my finger to pass on knowledge. Even a noob web novel reader knows it's a must in cultivation novels. Lin Yao's eyes widened as the revelations took root. For a long moment, she was silent, then dropped to her knees. "Thank you, Master." Her voice trembled with reverence and gratitude. Next, I tested her progress in the sword technique. We sparred in the open courtyard. My cloud-chasing sword technique mastery was currently at the perfected stage, while hers was at the small achievement stage. She struggled to hold her ground, but the improvement was undeniable. Her movements carried resolve, her strikes were no longer clumsy, and if she pushed herself, she might touch greater mastery soon. I corrected her mistakes with casual strikes. She listened carefully, engraving every correction into her heart. Their rhythm broke when a solemn chime rolled across the Sect, echoing through the mountain ranges. Deep and clear, not an alarm, but tradition. The Sect wanted to declare something. Golden streaks parted the clouds as a majestic eagle descended upon White Lotus Peak. A glowing jade slip was tied to its leg. I had a hunch. The disciple recruitment ceremony had been 3 months ago. Now, it was time for the tournament. The beast circled once, then descended into the courtyard, lowering its leg. I retrieved the slip with ease. Glowing letters appeared on the jade slip. By decree of the Heavenly Cloud Sect, in 1 month, the Grand Disciple Tournament would be held. The tournament would be held in 2 groups. Group 1 for all disciples under 20 years of age and below the Foundation Establishment realm. Group 2 for all disciples under 30 years of age and below the core formation realm. This was the chance to prove their worth before the elders and the sect master. I lowered the slip, silent for a moment. So it was time already. Lin Yao's eyes displayed both nervousness and anticipation, but I only folded the jade slip into my sleeve. Before the tournament, she needed experience. I turned toward the mountain path, my voice calm but decisive. We would head to the mission hall. It was time to earn our share of recognition. The mission hall stood at the heart of the outer sect, a towering structure of black stone carved with endless patterns of beasts, rivers, and mountains. Each carving shimmered faintly, as though alive, feeding chi into the massive jade pillars that supported the hall. As Lin Yao and I stepped inside, the bustle hit us like a wave. Outer disciples in plain robes queued before counters, clutching bamboo slips and jade plaques. Inner disciples moved with more confidence, pointing at glowing mission boards. Several deacons in dark blue robes patrolled the hall. The pair of us drew glances almost immediately. White Lotus Peak. I thought that place was abandoned. Why was he here for missions? The murmurs carried little weight, but Lin Yao's hands clenched at her sleeves. I, on the other hand, only found it mildly amusing. I ignored them, walking steadily toward the center of the hall. 4 great mission boards loomed there, each one crafted of jade and shimmering with light. The white jade board for outer disciples, herb gathering, odd jobs, and low-level beast culling. The green jade board for inner disciples, foundation establishment level. More dangerous, higher rewards. The blue jade board, reserved for core formation disciples and outer elders. Dangerous beasts, complex assignments. And the red jade board, also known as the elders board. Golden core and above. The air around it radiated pressure. Few dared even look directly. We stopped first at the white jade board. Rows of missions scrolled past. Gather moondew flowers, escort caravan, cull spirit rats. Lin Yao studied them with curiosity, but I shook my head. Escort missions wasted time. Too much waiting, too little fighting. My gaze had already shifted higher, to the green board. 2 missions caught my attention. Collect moonbloom petals for 180 low-grade spirit stones. Cull the red-furred wolves for 200 low-grade spirit stones. I gave a slight nod. This would be a good warm-up for her. From there, I moved toward the blue jade board. Here, the missions were entirely different levels. Hunt the crimson horn rhino for 1,100 spirit stones. Its hide was nearly impervious to blades. Subdue the bone serpent for 1,200 spirit stones. Several disciples had already perished attempting it. Cleanse the fallen orchid grove for 1,350 spirit stones. Thick poisonous miasma that corrupted the land and warped weaker minds. Slay the thousand-eyed centipede for 1,400 spirit stones. It induced mental illusions to hunt its prey. Survey the withered valley for 1,500 spirit stones. Chi anomaly detected, cause unknown. Seal the whispering tomb for 1,600 spirit stones. Extremely dangerous. Ghostly apparitions spotted. The rhino mission seemed to be a competition of strength, and I wasn't ready to deal with poison or illusion at this moment. Handling ghosts? I never even considered it. Only 2 of them seemed somewhat doable, and both were within a reasonable distance. If needed, I could always retreat. Missions allowed it. For this type of failure, disciples just had to pay a small fine. Still, I couldn't ignore the itch to test myself against something powerful. My eyes drifted further to the red jade board. The elders board. Purge the demonic cult outpost. Recover a missing nascent soul elder in the western seas. Purple Moon Kingdom requests aid. The weight of the tasks pressed even from a distance. A demonic cult, a missing nascent soul elder, kingdoms in rebellion. Nope, not my concern. Not yet. Stepping forward, I handed over 4 jade slips at the counter. These 4. 2 for my disciple, 2 for myself. The deacon, an old man with sharp eyes, studied me carefully. Was I certain? 2 of these missions were not that easy, and my disciple didn't even seem to have stepped into the foundation establishment realm. Beside me, Lin Yao lowered her head. She felt disappointed in herself, even ashamed. I did not waver. It was fine. I would be overseeing her. I trusted her. And if something unexpected happened, I would be right beside her. As a young disciple of the sect, she should always aim high, challenge greater trials, and strive for more difficult paths. Hearing this, Lin Yao's mood brightened. At that moment, something unseen shifted, as if an invisible thread of fate had been nudged, shifting onto a path different from what it was supposed to be. The deacon stamped the slips. As we turned to leave, whispers rippled through the hall. Did you see? He took the Bone Serpent mission, and even the Elder missions. He must be mad, or trying to dodge the tournament. High above, on a balcony where golden light cut through jade curtains, an elder stroked his beard as he watched. His eyes narrowed slightly, following my steady figure. Interesting. My aura was steady. Far too steady for a newly advanced core formation cultivator. Just what was our little acting peak master hiding? The next morning, the mystic grade flying sword hummed beneath my feet, flying low and steady. The cool wind rushed past, making me feel alive, yet I kept my speed in check. Beside me, Lin Yao stood stiffly, her balance unsteady at first. Only when I extended a thin layer of qi to shield her from the rushing wind did her posture relax. For once, she allowed herself a rare display of joy as she enjoyed the flight. At the base of the mountain, a massive stone gate pulsed faintly with runes, marking the boundary of the heavenly cloud sect. Passing through it felt like pushing through an invisible curtain. Beyond the gate sprawled the trade road, alive with caravans, peddlers, and hired guards. Our destination was Clearwind City, the closest major settlement under sect influence. The master-disciple duo landed near the city gate without attracting unnecessary attention. I chose an earth lizard carriage without hesitation. A carriage pulled by a thick-scaled creature, its four limbs short but powerful. The carriage driver bowed low. With a flick of my finger, I tossed 2 low-grade spirit stones. Our destination was half a day away. By the time the sun hung high overhead, we reached Cloudstep Village. I reviewed the mission details. A pack of red-furred wolves had ravaged the crimson herb fields near the village. Individually weak, they were dangerous due to their leader, who had recently advanced into the early Foundation establishment realm. The village itself seemed on edge. Fear clung to the air. The village head came forward to receive us, bowing deeply. After a brief exchange, I wasted no time. Carrying Lin Yao with me, I flew toward the crimson herb fields. The signs of wolf attacks were everywhere. Ravaged plants, torn fences, bloodstains. The wolves themselves were nowhere in sight, which meant we had to search the nearby forest. I told Lin Yao she would take the lead this time. She nodded. She had hunted beasts before. Her tragic past had given her no shortage of such experience. As we traveled through the forest, the first wolf soon spotted us and let out a sharp howl. That wasn't good. Before the howl could summon more, Lin Yao surged forward, closing the distance with practiced speed, and her blade sliced clean through the beast. But the howl had already spread. 3 more wolves appeared soon after. I intercepted the fiercest one, while Lin Yao took on the other 2. Though she needed occasional help, she fought with courage and intensity. I quietly helped her when needed. Soon, the 3 wolves were defeated. But that was only the warm-up. From the depths of the forest came the real threat. The pack leader, larger and sharper-eyed than the rest. For more wolves followed him. This one was no ordinary beast. Cultivation had granted it a spark of intelligence. Its eyes glowed with a predatory wisdom. The leader was at the early stage of Foundation establishment, while the others hovered around the middle stages of qi condensation. Without hesitation, the alpha lunged at me as the rest moved towards Lin Yao. I was concerned for her, but not overly so, as she carried the sect master's protective talisman. Lin Yao met the charge head-on. Beneath her composed, quiet exterior, a ferocious fighter awakened. I was surprised. Even during our sparring, she had never fought with such ferocity. The cloud-chasing sword technique flowed from her hands, each movement sharper, faster, more precise than the last. One by one, the wolves fell. I handled the alpha with ease. Its speed and power were real, but not nearly enough to trouble me. I deflected its attacks effortlessly, my stance calm and assured. Soon, Lin Yao stood victorious over the rest of the wolves. She beamed with strength rather than exhaustion. At my signal, she moved to join me. Without hesitation, she leapt forward and engaged the pack leader. It was stronger and faster than the others, but Lin Yao had momentum. The crimson flame mantra surged within her, resonating with her sword technique. Both were on the verge of a breakthrough. I extended my divine sense, even activating my essence sight. Every detail mattered. The flow of her chi, the strain of her muscles, the changes in her dantian. I studied it all. I even studied the wolf leader. The alpha fought desperately, but as fatigue set in, it made a mistake. A small opening appeared. Lin Yao's blade did not miss this opportunity. With a swift movement, she sliced through the beast, concluding the battle. Well done. My praise was brief, but genuine. I flicked 2 spirit-replenishing pills toward her. That was impressive. Now take some rest and go through your insights. She had gained something valuable. As she meditated to absorb her gains, I set about collecting the spoils. I focused only on the remains of the pack leader. There should certainly be a core within its body. Almost an hour later, she opened her eyes. With my essence sight, I noted her changes. Congratulations on her breakthroughs. She had advanced both in cultivation and in the cloud-chasing sword technique, now at the greater mastery. By afternoon, we returned to Cloud Step Village. More villagers had gathered. When I nodded, confirming the mission's success, cheers erupted. We chose to stay at the village inn for the night. I arranged for the wolves to be cleaned, keeping only the hides for mission confirmation, while leaving the rest to the villagers. That evening, the villagers celebrated with food and laughter, and by morning, the entire village gathered at the gates to bid us farewell. I did not forget to discreetly inspect the villagers, curious to see if any had potential for cultivation. Sadly, there was none. We descended from our flying sword at the outskirts of Yellow Forest City, the settlement closest to the next mission grounds. Compared to the bustling of Clearwind City, this was quieter but still busy. Stone-paved streets stretched ahead, lined with stalls selling herbs, trinkets, steaming buns, and skewers of sizzling meat. Lin Yao's eyes widened in curiosity as she took in every detail. This was her first time leaving the sect since becoming my disciple. As we walked past the stalls, I paused at one where someone was selling glistening sugar-coated fruits on bamboo skewers. A faint smile touched my lips as I bought 2. I handed one to Lin Yao and told her it was important to experience the world, not only through cultivation, but through its flavors too. Her expression softened, and a genuine smile appeared on her face. Our next mission was to collect moonbloom petals from the hollow caves. Rare Een-type herbs that bloomed once every 10 years, prized by the alchemy hall for refining frost essence pills. The flowers grew near pools of condensed Een chi, which could chill meridians and hinder cultivation if touched unprotected. Reports confirmed that a frost lizard, a mid-grade demonic beast, had claimed the area. I told Lin Yao this would be her trial. She had grown stronger, but cultivation was not meditation alone. She must fight, adapt, and temper herself in danger. Extending my divine sense, I moved through the deep jungle as we searched for the hollow caves. Before long, a chill seeped into my senses. Inside, frost coated the walls, glittering with tiny shards of ice. At the end of the cave, silver moonlight shone through cracks above, bathing a wide chamber in pale blue. Patches of Een water gathered on the ground, blue and glassy like mirrors. From within them, the moon-bloom flowers bloomed, their petals curling like frozen flames, glowing faintly with ethereal light. But then, a low hiss rolled across the chamber. From the shadows, a creature the size of a small horse emerged, scales gleaming with icy blue radiance. Its cold breath fogged the air. The frost lizard. It fixed its predatory gaze upon us. Lin Yao instinctively raised her sword, but I caught her arm. Wait. I probed the beast with essence sight. Its strength was almost at the level of the 3rd, perhaps even 4th grade of the Foundation establishment realm. Dangerous for Lin Yao, but not even a challenge for me. I told her it would be difficult, but to remember the beast's nature. Cold chi nourished it. Fire restrained it. Don't fight recklessly. Lin Yao's eyes burned with resolve. Then she made a request. She wanted to handle this. Please don't intervene, unless it was truly beyond her. I did not want to be reckless here and endanger her life, but when I saw the determination in her eyes, I gave up. Very well. Stepping back into the shadows, I spread my divine sense across the cavern. Every movement of the beast, and my disciple fell under my watch. My fingers were ready to unleash my flame sword manifestation at a moment's notice. Lin Yao launched forward like an arrow. Her cloud-chasing sword technique came to life as her blade blazed with a faint crimson flame. The frost lizard met her strike with a heavy sweep of its tail. Steel clashed against icy scales as sparks of steam hissed into the air. The impact staggered her, almost knocking her to the ground. But she gritted her teeth, poured chi into her stance, and steadied. The beast roared, exhaling a breath of freezing mist. Lin Yao responded instantly. Third form, cloud veil spiral. Whirling her blade, she wove a barrier that held back the frost. Without hesitation, she countered, thrusting through the mist with drifting cloud thrust, her flame carving a path. The cavern shook as flame and frost clashed, dissipating into steam. Yet the lizard's scales were unaffected. Each cut just grazed its armored hide. Sweat trickled down her temples. Her arms ached. But still, she pressed on. Lin Yao's crimson flame mantra surged brighter, feeding her strikes. She shifted into Cloud Step Slash, the first move I had drilled into her countless times. Her blade no longer wasted energy on the hard scales, but instead targeted the joints, the softer overlaps. One strike, then another, followed by another. She continued the flurry of attacks relentlessly. Finally, the lizard gave an opening. Her sword slashed across its left eye. The beast shrieked, thrashing, but the counterattack came fast. Its tail hammered her into the cavern wall. She cried out, breath knocked from her chest. My fingers twitched as chi emerged. My flame sword manifestation was ready. Master, don't. Lin Yao's voice cut through the lizard's cry. I can endure. I can still fight. Her body trembled, legs nearly giving way. But then her eyes hardened. With a roar of her own, she pushed off the wall, her cultivation surging at its peak. She lunged at the blinded side of the beast. The lizard sensed danger, tried to turn, but it was a second too late. Her sword plunged down, piercing through scale, bone, and skull. Lin Yao stood panting, chest heaving, her blade buried deep in the frost lizard's head. The beast gave a final shudder, icy vapor spilling from its mouth, before collapsing with a dull thud that echoed through the hollow cave. Silver moonlight reflected off her pale cheeks, where sweat glistened like dew. I stepped forward with a rare smile. Well done. I was proud of her, and I meant it. At the same cultivation level, even I might have struggled against this beast. Yet Lin Yao, my disciple, had defeated it through grit and skill. I produced a pale blue pill, smooth as jade, radiating a soft fragrance. Take this spirit-replenishing pill. Steady your breath, restore yourself, and reflect on your gains. She accepted with trembling fingers, bowing before swallowing the pill. She sat cross-legged, her crimson flame mantra circulating as her aura pulsed gently. I stood watch, my divine sense stretched like an invisible net across the cave. I moved to harvest our spoils. I plucked 30 moonbloom flowers with practiced care and sealed them in a jade box. From the frost lizard's corpse, I carved out a shimmering blue beast core. It pulsed with icy chi in my palm before I slipped it into my spatial ring. 2 hours later, Lin Yao's eyes opened. Her chi flowed smoother, steadier, glowing faintly beneath her skin. My essence sight revealed it clearly. Chi condensation realm, 9th stage. She stood, bowing low. Master, she had broken through. Her sword technique was stable at great mastery. I told her at this rate, she would surpass me in swordsmanship. She flushed, shaking her head. Master jests. But the fire in her heart only grew brighter hearing this praise. With the task complete, we left the cavern. Greenwall City loomed vast on the horizon, its walls lined with glowing runes. Within, streets bustled with merchants and cultivators alike. I raised an eyebrow. Quite extravagant. My identity associated with the Heavenly Cloud Sect secured rooms at a respectable and near the central market easily. Lin Yao moved to her room to rest while I descended to the counter. The inn's manager, a plump man with gleaming cheeks, brightened at my approach. I placed 2 low-grade spirit stones on the counter. The man's smile widened knowingly. For 2 stones, I would hear what even tavern gossips whisper. He told me the talk of Greenwall was the tragedy of Lin Fan, an orphan of the minor Lin clan, a peerless genius. His talent rivaled the young geniuses of the great clans even in the chi condensation realm. At 15, he was the clan's pride, engaged to none other than Lady Zhang Yuexin of the Zhang clan. Yes, I remembered. Inner disciple. Peak Master Huoliani of the Vermilion Flame Peak took her in at the last disciple's recruitment ceremony. But on the very night he broke through to Foundation establishment, disaster struck. His cultivation vanished. Gone utterly. His engagement was annulled. Lady Yuexin was engaged instead to Wang Tian, the young master of the Wang clan. Lin Fan challenged him to a duel. Stripped of cultivation, he was humiliated publicly, from genius to laughingstock in a single night. Since then, he had vanished. I slid the manager another spirit stone, more out of the gravity of the situation than generosity. Then I returned to my room. In silence, I sat cross-legged, the steady lamplight flickering across my face. Lin Fan, an orphan genius. Engagement broken. Humiliated by a young master of a great clan. My pulse quickened. This was too familiar. I thought of my life back on Earth. Of the countless novels I had devoured. Fallen prodigies, hidden inheritances, ancient entities and rings, divine treasures that turned their despair into destiny. Stories of chosen ones rising higher than ever. Oh, and always with a trail of beauties behind them. Fate's chosen ones. The protagonists. And now one stood here, in this very world. My hand instinctively pressed against my chest, over the mysterious lantern. I was never in denial. If I existed, so could others. But what kind of world was this? Among the cultivation novels I had once read, I primarily divided them into 3 categories. Category 1, the original cultivation novels. The protagonist follows the rules of the realm itself. Blessed by fortune, stumbled upon by destiny, or simply born with extraordinary talent. Sometimes they awaken ancient bloodlines, inheritances from fallen sects, or treasures buried deep in forgotten ruins. Their story is one of steady ascension. They fight rivals, crush obstacles, and step by step, they conquer realms and even the heavens themselves. These are the righteous young heroes. Proud, upright, and arrogant. Always unyielding in their pursuit of power. In the end, the world bends to their will, and beauties naturally gather by their side. They may suffer, but their path is never truly broken. Fate itself ensures their rise. Category 2. The most popular ones. Earth transmigrators, just like me, gifted with systems or other external cheats, but mostly systems. With the help of a mechanical voice that grants impossible abilities, they bend the world's logic around them. They rise quickly, hailed as the sole chosen one. On the surface, such figures are portrayed as clever, cunning, and endlessly resourceful. But I, having read the novels before, knew better. Strip away their so-called system, and they are nothing. It was rather laughable. In truth, they were nothing but puppets dancing to the commands of a screen or voice only they can hear. Brainless fools presented as geniuses, blindly obeying their cheat without thought or true struggle. Category 3. Recently, these have become popular and the most dangerous of all. These worlds were not ruled by a single chosen one, but were littered with them. Heaven's favorites walked everywhere, both the natural geniuses of Category 1 and the transmigrated cheats of Category 2. But in these stories, the true protagonist was not just another gifted individual. No, the true protagonist was the one who sees through the narrative itself. The one who can recognize the stories of others, see their fortune, and insert themselves at the precise moment to grab it. They were the scavengers of destiny, opportunists of the highest order. These characters defeated rival protagonists, plundered their inheritances, and even turned them into subordinates or disciples. Every chosen one they encountered was either consumed or crushed. Was I in such a world? Am I supposed to become like this? Because if one looked closely, these people, these predators of destiny, were no different from villains. Ruthless, scheming, trampling over others to climb higher. My jaw clenched but soon relaxed. But does it even matter, though? If the world insisted on forcing roles onto me, then let it. When problems come, I would answer them. If the world threw enemies at me, I would defeat them. If it called me a villain, then so be it. If it called me a hero, then let it be. In the end, I would be true to myself, and that was what mattered the most. Be it hero or villain, they were just some social constructs to justify people's means. I didn't care about that stupid stuff. But I would like to avoid crossing paths with such people if possible. They only brought chaos to the world, nothing else. My motto had always been simple. Don't bother me, and I won't bother you. But now I was not sure what to think of the situation. Maybe I wouldn't cross paths with Lin Fan. Maybe I would. But one thing was certain. If Lin Fan was truly a chosen one, then his downfall was nothing but the setup. He would rise again, more powerful than before. My thoughts drifted toward Lin Yao, resting quietly in the next room. When I first arrived in this world, I was not the real Su Ming. But I had taken on that mantle as per the situation and was steadily growing into it. Even for Lin Yao, it was only because of that faint, strange aura I had noticed through my essence sight that I chose her as a disciple. Building a faction that belongs to me was my original goal, nothing more. But as months passed, that goal blurred. Now, when I looked at her, I no longer saw just a promising recruit. She was my disciple. Not that I had ever taken disciples before, or had children, even on Earth. But in my heart, Lin Yao was someone I wanted to protect. And if she was special, which I truly believe she was, then crossing paths with a protagonist was inevitable. A sudden protective instinct surged within me. One wrong encounter with someone like Lin Fan could change everything for her. I whispered to myself that panicking wouldn't help. I needed information. I needed to watch carefully. If this Lin Fan crossed my path, I must be ready. For the first time since my transmigration, I felt unease. Not from beasts, nor some seniors in the sect, but from the weight of a story I recognized all too well. The canyon was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Jagged rocks were visible on both sides, scarred with deep gouges, as if some colossal beast had scraped past. A faint stench of rot lingered in the air, making my skin prickle. My grip on my sword tightened, eyes sharp, divine sense spread wide. Behind me, Lin Yao followed carefully, her steps light, but her aura tense. This was not just some beast lair. This was one of the main trade routes for Greenwall City, vital for herbs, ores, and silk caravans. With the bone serpent nesting here, merchants had no choice but to take long, dangerous detours. The Wang clan, who controlled most of the trade, suffered heavy losses. I had even spoken with one of them, Wang Chong, a balding middle-aged man who seemed honest enough. He treated me with respect, even offering a discount on supplies after learning I had taken on the serpent mission. But standing here now, all I felt was danger. This wasn't just a mission. This was a test of myself. My divine sense rippled, and a chill ran through my spine. Something enormous slithered beneath the rocks. It's coming. Without hesitation, I grabbed Lin Yao and shot into the air. The ground below exploded. A massive serpent burst forth, its body covered in white scales like jagged ribs. Bone spines jutted from its back, each one gleaming under the pale light. Empty sockets glowed faintly with dark fire. It was the bone serpent, middle core formation realm, stronger than expected. But before I could move, Lin Yao screamed, clutching her chest as her sword clattered to the ground. Her veins darkened, her body convulsing as if her soul itself was being torn apart. I panicked. I grabbed her into my arms and pulled back on my sword, rushing away fast. Through my essence sight, I saw it. The shadowy figure dormant in her bloodline was now pulsing faintly, and my gaze shifted to the serpent. Around its throat pulsed a bead, dark and glass-like, radiating an aura similar to the shadowy figure within Lin Yao. It was the Nether Ember Pearl, and Lin Yao's bloodline reacted to it like fire meeting oil. Damn it! If I didn't separate her from it now, things could get serious. As I created some distance, her condition stabilized, though her skin still burned with fever. I had to end this quickly. I shot forward, my sword blazing with crimson flame. The serpent struck first, its massive body lashing out. Bone spines sliced the air. I parried. As the burning steel scraped against calcified armor, sparks flew all over. My arms rattled from the heavy force. The serpent lunged, its jaw dripping with venom. I dodged narrowly, countering with a fiery thrust. My blade blazed with crimson fire, but the flames simply slid off its scales, leaving only shallow cracks. TCH, too tough. I switched into a different stance. Then I unleashed my perfected cloud-chasing sword technique. Ascending Serpent Surge. This was my ultimate move. Once the sword technique was perfected, you could use this ultimate move of the technique. My sword arcs came blazing like a meteor shower. Blades of fire rained down. Its scales cracked and scattered into fragments. Yet the serpent surged forward without slowing down. Every clash drained me. My breath grew ragged as beads of sweat dripped from my forehead. And then the realization hit me like lightning. I didn't know how to fight properly. I had techniques, insight, and cultivation, but no experience. My strikes were sharp, yet ineffective. The serpent exploited my every weakness. Bone spine slammed down like a hammer, forcing me back. My arm bled, my chest burned. Is this my limit? As the serpent was ready to unleash its dark breath, I clenched my teeth. Flame sword manifestation. I was done holding back. A colossal blade of fire roared into life, crashing into the serpent's dark breath. The clash shook the canyon. Stone exploded, smoke rose. I was thrown back, coughing blood. My flaming sword cracked apart. But I rose again. Not yet. The second manifestation blazed forth, hotter and sharper than before. I charged, carving through bone spines, splitting scales. For a moment, I gained my ground until the nether ember pearl pulsed again. The serpent's decaying vitality surged again. My knees buckled. My vision blurred. I couldn't lose. The third manifestation ignited. But this time, I compressed it, channeling all its power into a blade I could actually wield. My meridians screamed, blood spilling from my lips, but I pressed on. With a roar, I deflected the serpent's strike, darted into its blind spot, and brought my sword down. The canyon shook. Fire and darkness collided in a storm of destruction as the bone serpent's head split in two. Silence. The massive body collapsed as dust settled. The nether ember pearl rolled free, pulsing faintly, radiating an aura akin to death. I dropped to one knee, my sword dissolving into embers. My breath was ragged, my body broken, but my hand still reached out. I picked up the pearl and tried to study it, but its aura even shuddered me. I was running low on chi, so I couldn't use my lantern properly. But I understood one thing. That pearl was dangerous. I sealed it into my storage ring and retrieved the beast core. The largest one I had ever seen. Pain flowed through me with every step, but I staggered back to Lin Yao. She lay unconscious on the ground, but her breathing was steady now. I exhaled in relief, but inside, a bitter realization echoed. I was somewhat good at cultivation, knowledgeable in techniques, but in a real battle, I was still a noob, a paper tiger. My grip on my sword tightened, blood dripping from my hand. That night, I swore silently to myself. Never again. The news spread like wildfire through Greenwall City. 7 days ago, Lin Fan returned. The boy once mocked as a cripple, the fallen genius of the Lin clan, had reappeared, no longer pitiful, but with an arrogance sharper than any sword and a cultivation far beyond what anyone expected. He was stronger than ever. Without hesitation, he went straight for the Wangs. After defeating a dozen guards, he entered their main hall. Wang Tian, the proud young master, didn't even stand a chance. Lin Fan struck him down with a single punch, shattering his foundation. Then Lin Fan claimed the Wang family's prized treasure, the Crimson Blood Sword. The sword was no ordinary weapon. Forged with a crimson blood crystal at its core, it had been reserved for the heir of the family. Lin Fan unleashed a strike that shook the entire city. The arc of sword light was not something a foundation cultivator should have been able to produce. It surpassed the full strength of a core formation realm cultivator. Yet Lin Fan only laughed as he cut down their defenses. By the time an elder of the Wang clan tried to intervene, it was too late. Lin Fan walked away victorious, and then he disappeared. The Wang clan immediately declared a bounty. Lin Fan's head, alive or dead, would bring riches, honor, and eternal favor. Meanwhile, in the market, a young man with steady, measured steps moved like any other passerby. Lin Fan. No, Fan Lin. He had not discarded his name, but he knew when to take caution. The orb hidden in his sleeve pulsed faintly. Each time it glowed, his gaze shifted, scanning the streets. Then his steps halted. A young woman stood by a stall, pale white robes flowing, a sword at her hip. Her presence was serene, her expression calm. The orb throbbed wildly. Heavenly treasure. Runes flared across his vision, burning into his mind. Lin Fan's heart skipped. Was this not heaven's will? Proof that his downfall had only been the prelude to a greater rise. After all the despair, ridicule, and betrayal, here, finally, was heaven's answer. A girl destined to stand at his side. He approached, wearing a humble expression, though his voice carried a quiet confidence. He introduced himself as Fan Lin, a wandering cultivator, and asked for her name. Lin Yao blinked, caught off guard, then bowed politely. Lin Yao. Those two words etched themselves into his memory. After a pause, she added that she was a disciple of the Heavenly Cloud Sect. Of course, fate goes deeper than he imagined. His smile widened. He told her that her bearing alone carried elegance. To meet such a disciple here must surely be destiny. Lin Yao offered a polite smile, already taking a step back. The orb pulsed again, but stronger, as if whispering in his mind. Take her. Bind her fate to yours. He leaned in slightly, his tone soft and warm. Her name was as elegant as moonlight. Truly a name fit for greatness. His chest tightened with excitement. He remembered the same feeling once before, when the orb had led him to the Wang family's crimson blood sword. Or rather, the true treasure within, the crimson blood crystal. That sword was just a shell. The crystal was the real treasure. His thoughts drifted further back. Years ago, when he was still a boy, he had found this dull-looking orb among his parents' belongings. The last thing they had left him before their deaths. He had carried it everywhere, though it seemed utterly useless. Until tragedy struck. The day he broke through to Foundation establishment, the orb absorbed all of his cultivation. Overnight, he became a cripple, mocked by all, his engagement annulled. Yet heaven had not abandoned him. One day, he had formed a spiritual link with the orb and discovered its true ability. The power to sense treasures, ancient herbs, fallen cultivators' spatial rings, and many more. Each time, the orb guided him. Each time, he claimed a treasure and rose higher. And now it pointed directly at her. Not just a treasure, not just talent. The reaction was frantic, as if she were destiny itself. He forced his expression into that of a gentle young cultivator. He asked if she was a sword cultivator. Lin Yao gave a polite nod with a hint of uneasiness. Marvelous. His tone was warm, practiced. He said he would be honored to share a cup of tea with her. Perhaps they could even cultivate together someday. His words flowed with practiced charm. Each syllable carefully measured. Each line spoken like a man convinced that destiny itself bent toward him. Then my voice cut across the street like a blade. Calm, steady, and heavy enough to freeze Lin Fan's heart. Disciple Lin Yao, who is this young man? I had returned. I walked toward them with an easy, casual step, but my eyes flicked to the young man standing beside my disciple and lingered just long enough. One look was all it took. Lin Fan's wanted posters were plastered all over the city walls. The young man before me looked a little different, but not nearly enough to fool me. Hearing me use that formal way of addressing her made Lin Yao's back straight. I rarely spoke so formally to her. Pride warmed her for a heartbeat, and then she realized something was off. She moved closer to me and answered that this was Fan Lin, a wandering cultivator. Fan Lin. Fan Lin. That's the best you could think of? I almost laughed inwardly at the irony. I had read enough novels in my past life to understand the pattern immediately. Lin Fan felt the gaze and faltered for a fraction of a breath. Inside his sleeve, the dragon orb went silent. The runes dimmed. The sudden quiet from the orb unnerved him more than my words. At first glance, I seemed ordinary. Simple robes, restrained aura. But Lin Fan's instincts screamed that something was wrong. He forced his smile back into place. Impossible. I was no one. Fate chose him, not me. My face remained pleasant, but my eyes were sharp as blades. I stepped forward, activating my essence sight in a single, subtle motion that looked right through Lin Fan as if reading a page. Trying to salvage the moment, Lin Fan straightened and spoke with practiced politeness. Surely I didn't think disciples of righteous sects couldn't make friends outside the sect. The words sounded thin even to his own ears. My smile didn't widen. Friendship was earned, not claimed at first sight. Remember that. My tone was gentle with a tone of warning. Lin Fan felt naked under that gaze. As if every insecurity, every lie, every failure I had faced before, I saw through them. His pride screamed to fight, but the orb that had never failed him before remained mute. Why now? Panic came, then anger, but he chose to endure. He knew he could always take revenge later. He bowed, his muscles twitching with humiliation. Fan Lin greets Senior. Perhaps another time. Fate is not bound to a single meeting. Clenching his jaw, the young man turned sharply and walked away, blending quickly into the bustling market crowd. Lin Yao looked at me, her brow slightly furrowed in confusion. Do I know that cultivator? He felt strange. I turned to my disciple, my expression returning to its usual calm, but slightly annoyed state. I said I didn't, but she would do well to avoid individuals like him in the future. She asked why. Because he was a magnet for trouble. Men like that lived in constant conflict. Stand too close, and she would find herself dragged into public duels, clan vendettas, and sudden beast tides. They didn't seek strength through steady cultivation. They sought it through drama. If a young man with a broken sword and a smug expression approached her claiming destiny, treat him like a fraud and walk away. Lin Yao nodded seriously. She understood. She would focus only on her sword. Good. I turned back toward the inn, hoping that would be our first and final meeting. Back at the inn, I sat cross-legged on my bed, the shutters drawn against the evening market noise outside. When I had stepped close to Lin Fan, the twilight nether lantern in my soul had pulsed with a strange resonance. That strange orb. A soft knock interrupted me. Lin Yao entered and set a folded document on the low table beside my bed. The inn manager had this ready. Local information on the valley. She bowed and stepped back without another word, already learning when to leave me to my thoughts. I unfolded the parchment. Among the piles of records, one particular incident caught my attention. Incident Report, Regional Administrative Records, Year 620. 78 years ago, a deadly disease had swept through the villages bordering what was then a thriving agricultural basin. The plague had no name in the records, just a description of symptoms that sounded like a sickness that drained vitality faster than any natural disease should. Entire families had perished within weeks. The regional authorities, lacking the resources or manpower to cremate or relocate the dead during the crisis, had decided to bury the victims in mass graves at the basin's lowest point. The death toll, by the document's conservative estimate, exceeded 5,000 mortal souls. The basin in question was the current Withered Valley. I set the document down slowly. 5,000 deaths, concentrated in one location, buried without proper ritual, without dispersal, without anything to settle the accumulated in-death energy. That kind of event was extremely dangerous. I activated the Twilight Nether Lantern, letting my mind drift back through everything I had learned about the valley's chi anomaly. The gradual draining of chi, the zombie-like withered beasts, and the strange absence of active hostility. All of these pointed to some sort of natural anomaly rather than some evil person's handiwork. I thought of the nether ember pearl sealed in my storage ring. I wondered if it was also related. Either way, I needed to see it myself before concluding. I called Lin Yao and told her we leave for the Withered Valley in 3 days. Prepare accordingly. This would be a more demanding mission than our previous assignments. If my prediction was correct, the valley had been dying slowly for the last 78 years. 3 more days would not change that outcome. What it would change was whether we arrived prepared or arrived reckless. As if a sudden enlightenment flashed across her face, Lin Yao bowed. I understand, Master. I plan to spend the first of those 3 days in quiet recovery. It was not a dramatic injury, nothing that demanded urgent pills or immediate care, but the accumulated strain of the past weeks had left a faint fatigue that I did not intend to carry into an unknown environment. By the second day, fully recovered, I turned my attention to the nether ember pearl. I unsealed the dark, glass-like orb from my storage ring and activated my essence sight, letting the halo of insight wash over its structure layer by layer. The pearl's corruption was undeniable. A crystallized form of mutated Yin and death chi, probably born from the bone serpent's unnatural mutation. But beneath the corruption, I could sense something purer. A foundational principle. A certain pattern the cold chi was following. I let my essence sight and halo of insight run at full power, and for the next couple of hours, I studied it. Then I used my white flames to carefully remove the outer corruption. What remained was a dark purple bead. It did not glow, but deep within its core, a faint light pulsed like the final, cold ember of a dying fire. A pure, untouched representation of death. As I studied its structure, a profound realization settled over me. Death is not the absence of life. It is simply an energy that has reached absolute stillness. I spent the better part of a day and a half, barely moving, tracing the pearl's energy against everything I already understood about my own Crimson Flame mantra. My Crimson Flames were chi in motion. It insisted on existing loudly. And this dark purple pearl was an ember that had finally gone completely still. A chi that had stopped insisting. It was cold. It was still. It was quiet. It was death. By the evening of the second day, something clicked into place in my mind. Not like an extreme clarity of a breakthrough, but with the quiet certainty of a missing piece finally fitting together. I raised one hand and channeled a thread of my crimson flame mantra through it. But instead of letting it burn outward as it always had, I let it fold inward like the principle I had just spent a day and a half learning from the pearl. The flame that bloomed from my palm was not crimson. It was a deep, violet black at its core, threaded through with pale, frost-colored light along its edges. A fire that gave off no warmth at all, that seemed to draw heat out of the air around it rather than add to it. I stared at it for a long moment, faintly impressed with myself. There were no named moves, no flashy techniques attached to it yet. It was just an extension of my existing powers. But I could already feel its potential. This was not a replacement for my Crimson Flame mantra. It was a different power, one that governed Een, cold, and death. Domains my bright crimson fire never touched. The Nether Flame art, I decided its name swiftly. With a flick of my fingers, the quiet dark flame dissolved without a trace. 3 days were almost over. Tomorrow, we would leave for the valley. The outskirts of the withered valley were as bleak as the name suggested. The once lush trees had shed their leaves long ago, leaving behind twisted, calcified branches that pierced the gray sky. The ground was devoid of any grass, replaced by cracked, dead soil that crunched underfoot. As we crossed the invisible threshold into the valley, Lin Yao took a step forward and immediately stumbled, her chest tightening as a sudden weakness washed over her. "Master," she gasped, tightly gripping her sword. Her dantian felt heavy. The chi here felt sluggish. I came to a halt, my silver-threaded gray robes unstirred by the dead air. I swept my gaze across the barren landscape. The natural spiritual energy of heaven and earth, which was usually present everywhere, was entirely absent here. It was a complete vacuum, an atmospheric void that actively resisted a cultivator's internal circulation. I explained that her cultivation was struggling because the chi in the nearby area was depleted. The atmosphere was very different from what she was used to. I told her to calm herself down and relax. Use her cultivation technique to stabilize. Lin Yao closed her eyes, recalling the flawless circulation paths I had helped her understand. Slowly, she pulled her flaring chi inward, sealing it tightly inside her meridians rather than allowing it to interact with the oppressive environment. The heavy pressure on her chest gradually eased. Good. I told her adaptability was the difference between a real cultivator and a paper tiger. Let's go. I analyzed internally as we resumed walking. Without ambient chi, every technique costs more chi to perform and yields less output. I had to manage my reserves strictly. No flashy sword waves. Clean and efficient moves only. For the next hour, we descended deeper into the valley. Mutated beasts, rotting, fleshy, gray-skinned creatures with red eyes, periodically lunged from the dead brush. I did not draw my sword. Instead, I allowed Lin Yao to take the vanguard, using the hostile environment to temper her newly consolidated cultivation. She dispatched the beasts with clean, efficient strikes of her sword, her movements growing sharper and more conservative with every kill. When we finally reached the deepest basin of the valley, the air grew so thick with oppressive energy that it felt like wading through freezing water. I held up a hand, bringing Lin Yao to a halt. I narrowed my eyes, activating the twilight nether lantern within my soul. Through the eye of the essence, the gray fog peeled away, revealing the true nature of the valley. Beneath the cracked earth, countless natural ley lines had twisted and inverted, forming a massive, naturally occurring death formation. At the absolute center of this formation, floating above the deadly earth, was a physical crystallization of pure death energy. A dark, pulsing death seed. The seed was acting as a vacuum, relentlessly sucking the life and chi out of the entire region to fuel its own growth. And it was not unguarded. Resting comfortably at the base of the altar was a colossal, dark-furred demonic wolf. Its body was wrapped in thick, corrupted miasma, and its aura bordered on the terrifying threshold of a demon lord. Fortunately, it was currently asleep, lulled by the dense death chi gathering around the seed. As I evaluated the structural weak points of the formation, a sudden shift in the air broke my concentration. From the high ridge overlooking the basin, a figure stepped out from behind a dead tree, pulling away a talisman that crumbled into ash. It was Lin Fan. The young man's robes were stained with dirt, a stark contrast to the arrogant, untouchable aura he had projected at the Greenwall City banquet. Following his humiliating defeat by the Wong clan enforcers, his dragon orb had guided him here to the Withered Valley. He had spent his last few spirit stones tricking an ordinary merchant, his cheat item allowing him to pluck a high-quality aura hiding talisman from a pile of cheap, ordinary items. He had spent the last 2 days investigating me, his resentment festering into a toxic obsession. A useless, crippled peak master. A mere handyman, disciple who got lucky during a crisis. That was his impression of me. He had rationalized everything. He needed Lin Yao. His heaven-stealing cauldron art required a vessel of supreme talent to fix his damaged foundation, and Lin Yao was the only woman he had encountered whose talent met the requirements. In his twisted mind, he was a destined hero, obligated by the heavens to save the fairy Lin Yao from wasting her potential under a fraud. Standing on the ridge, Lin Fan looked down at the natural death formation. His dragon orb pulsed, and he immediately noticed that the massive array of death chi was violently reacting to the rich dragon blood essence contained within his stolen crimson blood sword. A cruel, arrogant smile spread across his face. Let's test the waters. Let's see if the fraud can survive this. Driven by sheer malice, Lin Fan raised the crimson blood sword and plunged its blade directly into a crucial node of the death formation on the ridge. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. The massive influx of pure, vibrant dragon blood essence acted like a drop of boiling water hitting hot oil. The death formation went violently berserk. The gray fog swirling in the basin turned pitch black, and the colossal demonic wolf at the center of the altar snapped its eyes open, letting out an earth-shattering howl that sent goosebumps down Lin Yao's bones. As the dense fog suddenly cleared, a loud voice pierced her ears. "Fairy Yao," Lin Fan called out from the ridge, his voice dropping into a softer, calculated tone. He was not here to harm her. He was here to help. He gestured dismissively toward me. That man takes disciples so that he can use them. She was talented. She deserved proper guidance, a proper future. "Stop," Lin Yao said, her voice icy. "Come with me. I can offer you." I said stop it. He was a useless cripple playing at peak master. Lin Fan shouted, genuine contempt bleeding into his voice. A handyman disciple who got lucky. She was wasting her potential following a man who couldn't even. As Lin Yao did not bother to hear the rest, something changed in her gaze. It was not rage in the dramatic sense. It was not fire-veined fury or an emotional surge. It was something quieter and more absolute than that. A line being crossed that she had not known existed until it was crossed. She looked up at the boy on the ridge, and for the first time, she saw him not as an arrogant peer, but as something utterly pathetic and repulsive. Despite the oppressive death energy attempting to trigger something within her, she drew her sword, the blade humming with pure, uncorrupted killing intent aimed solely at Lin Fan. "Lin Yao, fall back." My voice cut through the tension, calm and commanding. I told her to leave the valley immediately and fetch the Wong clan guards. Tell them their thief has been cornered. My voice did not waver at all. It was as steady as a lake, without any ripple, completely unaffected by the apocalyptic pressure of the death formation. This sudden, absolute calm and authoritative tone from me brought her back from the edge. Taking a moment to steady her breathing, she nodded. "Yes, master." Lin Yao did not hesitate. She sheathed her sword and immediately bounded backward, retreating toward the valley entrance. I stepped forward without drawing the mystic grade sword from my waist. The demonic wolf completely ignored Lin Fan on the ridge. Its instinct was entirely consumed by the violent clash between the formation's death chi and the dragon blood essence, leaving me as the only target in its path. Peak high-level demonic beast. The strongest opponent I had faced since my transmigration. But its attack pattern was completely predictable. My eyes flashed silver. It was extremely risky, but it was the most efficient way to defeat it. I channeled my chi, executing my crimson sword manifestation as 3 highly condensed, physical swords of crimson flame materialized in the air around me. With a flick of my wrist, I sent 2 of the blazing swords shooting forward with pinpoint accuracy. The first sword pierced the wolf's open maw, while the second impaled its chest, shattering its corrupted core and pinning its massive body to the cracked earth. The crimson fire erupted from the inside out, burning the colossal beast to ash in a single, flawless execution. Although more than two-thirds of my power was gone with this move, I was satisfied with myself. On the ridge, Lin Fan's arrogant smile froze. Panic seized his heart. I hadn't even struggled. Desperate, Lin Fan tried to channel more power from the Crimson Sword into the formation to attack me. But he pushed too hard. The conflicting energies of the Death Formation and the Dragon Blood Essence violently rebounded. A massive shockwave of gray chi exploded from the ridge, striking Lin Fan squarely in the chest. He coughed up a mouthful of black blood and was thrown backward, crashing heavily into a dead tree. Ignoring the dying cries of the wolf, I walked calmly near the formation, stopping before the pulsing death seed. My essence sight flared, warning me immediately. If I used the Crimson Flame mantra to destroy it, the heat and life energy would simply feed the death seed. I raised my left hand. Instead of my signature Crimson Fire, I activated the Nether Flame art, the technique I had recently comprehended from the Nether Ember Pearl. A deep, violet-black flame bloomed from my fingertips. It gave off no warmth, pulsing with the pure essence of Een and death. With surgical precision, I swept the violet-black flame over the formation. The Nether Flame seamlessly resonated with the Death Seed, allowing me to sever its connection to the natural Death Formation without triggering a violent reaction. I swiftly sealed the pristine crystal into a specialized jade box and placed it in my storage ring. Instantly, the oppressive, sluggish atmosphere of the withered valley began to lift. The gray fog thinned, and a faint trickle of natural spiritual energy began to return to the basin. Mission accomplished. But as I turned, a terrifying surge of energy erupted from the ridge. Lin Fan, bleeding and maddened by the backlash, had gripped the crimson blood sword with both hands. The rich dragon blood essence within the red crystal, sensing his desperate need, violently surged into his meridians. The sheer density of the ancient dragon blood forcibly elevated his foundation establishment cultivation, pushing his aura higher and higher until it temporarily shattered the boundaries of a major realm, touching the pinnacle of the core formation stage. His eyes glowing with blood-red madness, Lin Fan launched himself from the ridge, his sword tearing through the air, aimed directly at my back. 9 Desolation's sword technique, Desolate Earth Slash. As Lin Fan soared through the air, his blade descended in a brutal, horizontal arc. I did not retreat. I quickly drew my mystic rank sword from its scabbard, bringing it up in a flawless, structural parry to meet the strike. Clang! The impact rang out like a giant bell. The cracked ground beneath my feet spider-webbed outward from the sheer force of the blow. The power behind Lin Fan's attack was incredibly heavy. His raw physical strength was almost equal to my level. I activated my essence sight. This was already pushing my chi to the limit, as I had not fully recovered from the previous fight. Even more concerning was the aura bleeding from Lin Fan's blade. Through my essence sight, I saw a terrifying, unstable mixture of the crimson blood sword's vibrant red essence grinding against the residual, necrotic black death chi from the formation. The two opposing energies were clashing violently, creating a highly destructive force. Die! Lin Fan roared, completely abandoning defense as he launched into a relentless assault. He rained down heavy, sweeping slashes, each one carrying the decaying weight of the desolate earth. I did not lose my focus. I had already depleted more than two-thirds of my chi dealing with the wolf. A flashy, overpowering counterattack would drain the rest, which was an unacceptable risk right now. This was better anyway. I needed a practice partner anyway. Instead of meeting force with force, I executed the cloud-chasing sword technique. My movements became light, fluid, and utterly unpredictable. As Lin Fan's heavy, corrosive strikes crashed down, I simply wasn't there. I glided along the edges of the attacks, my plain mystic grade sword gently tapping the flat of Lin Fan's blade to redirect the terrifying momentum into the dirt. Flickering my essence sight on and off for brief, calculated half-seconds to minimize the strain, I coldly analyzed the flow of Lin Fan's chaotic energy. In those momentary flashes of my vision, I stripped away the terrifying aura of Lin Fan's powerful sword technique and saw the exact structural weaknesses in its execution. As the frantic exchange continued, a quiet realization settled into my mind. the cloud-chasing sword technique was officially graded as a mystic grade art. In the grand scheme of the cultivation world, it was relatively weak. But having mastered the near-impossible 10th perfection, the technique's nature had changed. In my hands, it was no longer an ordinary technique. My parries were absolute, my footwork devoid of wasted energy. Even against an ancient saint-level technique executed by an amateur like Lin Fan, my flawless execution rendered the raw power gap irrelevant. "Stop dodging!" Lin Fan screamed, his frustration boiling over. His eyes, completely bloodshot, flared with madness. He shifted his stance violently, altering the flow of his chi. 9 Desolation's sword technique, Evaporated Sea. Lin Fan unleashed the second move of his technique. A massive, sweeping arc of highly corrosive chi erupted from his blade, acting like a tidal wave of acid designed to dry up rivers and boil seas. It covered a massive area, completely sealing off my escape routes. I did not dodge. There it is. I had been biding my time, waiting for Lin Fan's berserk mentality to make an error. Channeling the last reserves of my core, I stepped directly in front of the corrosive wave and executed the ultimate move of my perfected technique. Ascending Serpent Surge. A massive serpent of pure crimson sword chi erupted from my blade. As it crashed into the corrosive wave, the serpent, against the violent wave of Lin Fan's saint-grade sword technique, evolved, transforming into a soaring, golden crimson dragon. The dragon manifestation shattered the evaporated sea like glass, roaring as it slammed directly into Lin Fan's chest. His ribcage cracked audibly as he was sent flying backward, the stolen crimson blood sword knocked from his grasp. He rolled across the dirt, crashing into the base of the stone altar. For a moment, the valley was silent. Then, with the terrifying resilience of a cornered beast, Lin Fan twitched. Coughing up thick, black blood, he pushed himself up, his eyes entirely consumed by madness as he reached blindly for his fallen sword. Then something clicked within his mind. He had an epiphany. The complex pages of the 9 Desolation sword technique were not meant to be fully comprehended by him yet. It was too advanced. It was too complex. But in that moment of absolute desperation, he understood the fundamental flaws in his execution. The violent realization triggered a chain reaction. He forcibly broke through the limitations of his cultivation realm, reaching the core formation stage in an instant as his cultivation base skyrocketed. Driven by the lingering death chi and the dragon orb, the momentum did not stop until he stabilized at the absolute peak of the core formation stage. All of this happened within a few blinks of an eye. As he regained his composure, brimming with newfound, explosive power, he prepared to rise. But he didn't even make it to his knees. All he saw in front of him was the silhouette of a burning palm, and then everything went black. Just a moment ago, while Lin Fan was undergoing his sudden breakthrough, I had used that exact window to recover my footing and prepare for the final blow. Though I was confident in my cloud-chasing sword technique, I realized I had to keep the boy alive to complete my plan. Thus, I resorted to another method. Refusing to waste any more chi on sword manifestations, I channeled my remaining chi into my right hand and executed the burning palm, a highly efficient, mortal-grade close-quarters technique I had picked up from the Sect library. My palm struck Lin Fan directly on the face. A burst of intense, concussive heat flooded Lin Fan's brain, instantly knocking him out of consciousness. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into the dirt, completely incapacitated. The dead wind of the withered valley howled through the basin, carrying the metallic scent of blood and the bitter chill of lingering death chi. I exhaled a long, heavy breath, my aura dimming. I was totally exhausted. My dantian ached from the sheer volume of output in such a hostile environment. If I keep him alive, he will probably cause another problem for me. I activated my essence sight, putting a mild strain on my exhausted self to scan the unconscious boy. The golden glow immediately highlighted a spatial ring on Lin Fan's finger and a strange orb hidden beneath his sleeves. Without hesitation, I stripped him of both, immediately sealing the orb deep inside my own storage ring. Extending my divine sense into Lin Fan's spatial ring, I quickly cataloged the inventory. Assorted spirit herbs, a few high-quality pills, some spirit stones, a few loose pages regarding his sword technique, and a distinct jade slip hidden deep within. As my senses brushed against the jade slip, I paused. I withdrew the slip and read the description. It was the heaven-stealing cauldron art. As I read the details of the technique, how it superficially healed and strengthened its victims by performing an exchange of yin and yang while secretly siphoning their supreme talent, and worse, how it forcibly forged an artificial, fanatical psychological bond of loyalty, a genuine wave of disgust washed over me. Disgusting. Reading about such tropes in my past life had been a mildly amusing experience, but actually holding the vile methodology in my hands was another matter entirely. It was an utterly parasitic, brainwashing, demonic art. I didn't need a mystical vision to understand what would have happened if I hadn't intervened. Lin Fan had fully intended to use this exact art to slowly, methodically brainwash Lin Yao, parasitizing her dormant talents until she was nothing but a husk. A cold, absolute finality settled over my expression, as a certain sense of killing intent rose within me. I turned my gaze back to the unconscious Lin Fan, my hand resting on the hilt of my sword. I drew my sword an inch, preparing to cleanly end the boy's life. Master. I paused, sliding the sword back into its sheath. I turned my head. At the entrance of the valley basin, Lin Yao had returned. Behind her, fully armed and radiating cold, killing intent, marched a dozen elite enforcers of the Wang clan. Leading them was a burly, imposing man, his face weathered, deeply lined with exhaustion, and radiating a simmering, volcanic rage. This was Wang Zheng, the head of the Wang clan. Wang Zheng's heavy footsteps halted as he took in the scene. His eyes swept over the shattered stone altar, the lingering scorch marks of my sword attacks, and finally landed on the broken, unconscious figure lying in the dirt. Is that him? Wang Zheng's voice was a low, terrifying rumble. The aura of a core formation cultivator pressed down heavily on the valley. Is this the animal who crippled my son? I calmly stepped aside, gesturing toward Lin Fan with a casual gesture. He is. I pointed toward the base of the altar, where the stolen crimson blood sword lay discarded. But I feared his son was merely collateral damage in a much darker scheme, Patriarch Wang. Wang Zheng's gaze snapped to his clan's prized heirloom. His eyes widened in absolute horror. The once vibrant crimson blade was heavily cracked. Far worse, it was radiating a putrid, necrotic black aura. The residual death chi of the valley, combined with the chaotic clash of the dragon blood, had turned the majestic weapon into something that looked like it had been pulled from a mass grave. My expression remained perfectly grave. I easily slipped into the role of the righteous Sect elder, delivering my narrative with flawless precision. A rogue demonic cultivator. He did not steal the heirloom merely for its value. He used the crimson blood sword as a specialized conduit. Its high-quality essence was exactly what he needed to forcibly siphon the residual death chi of this valley and spread disaster. Not only that, but he also intended to use this despicable demonic art. I held up the jade slip, a dual cultivation technique that gradually siphons the victims of their supreme talent. I summoned a flicker of my crimson flame to my fingertips and dropped the jade slip directly onto it. The demonic manual ignited instantly. As the jade cracked and burned into literal ash, I felt a faint, invisible weight settle into the twilight nether lantern within my soul, a microscopic drop of pure samsara resin harvested from permanently severing the demonic art. I told Wang Zheng I came from the Heavenly Cloud Sect to investigate the recent disturbances in this valley. I tracked the death chi here only to find this young man in the process of performing a dark ritual. I arrived just in time to interrupt the ritual and destroy his foundational manual. Had he succeeded, the Heavenly Cloud Sect would have been forced to intervene directly. Wang Zheng's face turned completely pale, then flushed with a rage so profound it visibly shook his burly frame. A demonic cultivator. This absolute scum had not only ambushed and destroyed the cultivation of his beloved heir, Wang Tian, but had also intended to use their sacred ancestral weapon for a taboo ritual. Blinded by grief and hatred, Wang Zheng marched toward the unconscious Lin Fan. Lin Fan's body was currently in an incredibly fragile state. In his final, desperate moments, he had undergone a violent, forced breakthrough to the peak of the core formation stage. The sheer volume of energy packed into his newly formed dantian was immense, but because he had been knocked unconscious instantly, he hadn't had the time to stabilize it. It was like a bulging dam on the verge of bursting. Wang Zheng stood over the boy. He raised his heavy, steel-plated boot, channeling the absolute maximum of his earth chi into his heel. You took my son's future, so I will take yours. He stomped down with the force of a falling boulder, driving his heel directly into Lin Fan's lower abdomen. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud in the quiet valley. Lin Fan's eyes flew wide open, the whites completely bloodshot, as a silent, agonizing scream tore from his throat. His body convulsed violently before going entirely limp. The newly formed peak core formation Dantian shattered like thin glass under a hammer. The massive reservoir of energy he had just accumulated was violently dispersed. I watched without any outward reaction, but deep within my soul, the twilight nether lantern flared with a warm, violet light. A heavy, dense drop of samsara resin formed and fell into its reserves. By allowing the Wang clan head to shatter the boy's Dantian, I had dealt a devastating blow to Lin Fan's original trajectory. The hero path of the original timeline had been forcibly shattered, pushing the heavens chosen onto a far darker road. In that exact moment, the lantern granted me a strange sensation, an echo of severed fate. This was the first time I had experienced the phenomenon. Because my cultivation was still low and the harvested resin was only a single drop, there was no grand, visual revelation. Instead, it was a sudden realization that settled quietly into my mind. It was another function of the lantern. I instinctively understood that by crippling this boy today, I had successfully derailed a fate built on countless corpses and victims. The clarity of the echo was directly proportional to the amount of samsara resin harvested. A single drop yielded a faint realization. A massive harvest, perhaps like the actual death of a heavens chosen, would likely trigger a full vision of the severed timeline. It is done. Wang Zheng breathed heavily, stepping back from the broken body. He turned to me, bowing deeply. The Wang clan was eternally in my debt. But what of their ancestral sword? Wang Zheng looked at the crimson blood sword with deep concern. The heirloom was a prized possession, granting subcore formation cultivators power equal to the next major realm. I sighed, playing the part of the burdened hero perfectly. I could not allow him to take it back to Greenwall City. This weapon was heavily corrupted by demonic chi. If returned to his estate, the necrotic aura would slowly leak, poisoning his grounds and permanently crippling the cultivation of his descendants. The enforcers shuddered, and Wang Zheng looked absolutely horrified. I must confiscate it. White Lotus Peak possessed the arrays necessary to cleanse this level of corruption. Wang Zheng bowed even deeper. If I was willing to take this cursed object away from them, they were eternally grateful. I nodded. It was my duty as a follower of the righteous path. Wrapping the cracked sword in my chi, I deposited it into my storage ring. The heirloom, containing the rich blood essence, was now legally mine. Secure the demonic cultivator, Wang Zheng ordered, his voice icy. Throw him in the deepest level of the dungeon. The enforcers quickly shackled the unconscious Lin Fan, hauling him off. Wang Zheng then turned to me, his posture shifting from grieving father to respectful host. He invited me and Lin Yao to the main estate for a proper reward. I glanced at Lin Yao, who gave a subtle nod. We accepted. The Wang clan's main estate in Greenwall City was a sprawling complex of heavily fortified stone pavilions. Tonight, however, we were received as absolute saviors. We were ushered into the central grand hall, where tables were quickly laden with high-grade spiritual wine, roasted spirit beast meats, and fragrant spiritual teas. Wang Zheng sat at the head of the long wooden table. He looked years older, his burly frame slumping slightly as the adrenaline faded. He told me he couldn't overstate what my intervention meant to their clan. Not only did I capture the beast who crippled his son, but I prevented their ancestral heirloom from becoming a demonic anchor. They owed me a debt of blood. I took a slow, measured sip of my spiritual tea. It was merely the responsibility of the righteous path. Demonic cultivators were a cancer upon the world. Wang Zheng gestured to one of his senior elders, who stepped forward carrying a heavy, ornate wooden chest. Inside lay neatly stacked rows of high-grade spiritual stones. A one-time bounty of 25,000 spirit stones. Lin Yao, standing quietly behind me, briefly widened her eyes. 25,000 spirit stones were an astronomical fortune for an average cultivator. But I barely glanced at the chest. My calculating instincts, honed over a lifetime, kicked in instantly. A one-time payout was a foolish, short-sighted gain. True wealth was not about the absolute sum in your pocket today. It was about establishing long-term, sustainable streams of resources that required zero maintenance. Passive income. I gently closed the lid of the chest. While Wang Jing's generosity was profound, I must decline this bounty. Wang Jing blinked, clearly taken aback. Was it not enough? It was entirely too much. I was the White Lotus Peak Master of the Heavenly Cloud Sect. If I were to accept a mercenary's bounty for eliminating a demonic threat, what does that say about the integrity of my sect? We do not sell our protection. The Wang clan elders exchanged deeply impressed glances. Such unshakable righteousness. Such noble bearing. However, I continued, my tone shifting from a righteous elder to a pragmatic diplomat. I was aware that the Wang clan's operations had suffered recently, particularly due to the loss of several minor spirit veins in the northern territories. Wang Zheng sighed heavily. News travels fast. I reached into my robes and withdrew 3 jade slips. These were the slips I had looted from Lin Fan's spatial ring. The maps guiding the protagonist to undiscovered, highly lucrative fated encounters. While tracking the demonic cultivator, I uncovered a hidden valley deep within the withered mountain range. I lied effortlessly. Within it lies an untapped mid-grade spirit vein, a dense deposit of ironwood, and a secluded alcove containing a natural garden of century-old spiritual herbs. Wang Jing's eyes widened. I proposed an alliance. White Lotus Peak would provide the exact topographical maps, the safe routes through the miasma, and the clearance to operate under the protective banner of the Heavenly Cloud Sect. In exchange, the Wang clan would provide the labor, handle the excavation, manage the logistics, and take on the operational risks. We split the net yield. 60% to White Lotus Peak, 40% to the Wang clan. In perpetuity, the hall went dead silent. The Wang clan elders stared at the jade slips as if they were made of solid gold. For a regional clan, securing a new, untapped mid-grade spirit vein was a generational game-changer. And doing it under the explicit, authorized protection of a Heavenly Cloud Sect Peak Master, it meant none of their rival clans would dare attempt a hostile takeover. 40%, Wang Zheng repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Even with the smaller share, being handed a protected mid-grade spirit vein was the key to his clan's long-term survival. Peak Master Su, this was more than they could have ever hoped for. Let's just say it was an investment in regional stability. A thriving Greenwall city benefits the sect. Can I assume we have a deal? You have a deal. Wang Zheng agreed instantly, standing up and bowing so deep his forehead nearly touched the table. An hour later, the negotiations were formalized. The contracts were drawn up and signed in a quiet, private audience. The Wang clan officially registered the establishment of the White Lotus Mining Initiative. As the ink dried, Wang Zheng insisted I take a physical token of their gratitude. It was a matter of their clan's face. He gestured to a trusted elder, who reverently brought over a small, velvet-lined box. They found this decades ago. Their appraisers had never been able to identify its exact nature, nor could any flame melt it or any blade scratch it. It was entirely useless to them, but it was the most ancient artifact in their vault. I looked inside. Resting on the velvet was a palm-sized, heavily calcified object that resembled a curved, jagged stone. My essence sight didn't even need to activate fully. The faint, ancient resonance in my mind recognized it instantly. It was a dragon scale. I accepted the token. Within the quiet, heavily warded private office of the Wang estate, the contract of the White Lotus Mining Initiative lay signed on the desk. Wang Zheng was just raising his teacup when the heavy wooden doors were violently pushed open. A panicked voice of a senior healer echoed down the hallway. A moment later, a figure stumbled into the room, gasping for breath. It was Wang Tian. The young master was in a horrifying state. Wrapped in thick, blood-stained bandages, his face pale and limbs trembling, he had torn away the medical wraps holding his herbs in stasis. Pushing past the healers trailing behind him, he dragged his broken body across the polished wooden floor of the office, leaving a faint trail of crimson. Tianer, Wang Zheng gasped, his face turning pale. He rushed forward to support his son. Ignoring his father's hands, Wang Tian focused entirely on me. With a final, agonizing exertion of will, he dropped onto both knees in the center of the office, lowering his forehead until it pressed flat against the cold floor. His voice was hoarse, yet it vibrated with a stubborn, unyielding pride. He paid his respects to Peak Master Su. That evil demonic cultivator Lin Fan had been punished, saving the fate of his Wang clan and the entire Greenwall City. He felt deeply ashamed. It should have been his own sword that brought justice. Instead, he lay helpless while I bore the burden of their salvation. He refused to hide in bed when he must personally pay his respects to his savior. Clang! Wang Zheng stood frozen, his hand shaking. The jade teacup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. Hot tea splashed across the rug in his boots, but the patriarch didn't even blink. He stared down at his proud, crippled son kneeling in the dirt, his heart breaking at the sight. I watched the kneeling youth, a silent trace of appreciation for the boy's grit flickering behind my calm, analyzing eyes. It was easy to maintain pride when one was a genius, but to drag a shattered body from a sickbed to claim that pride in front of me was another matter entirely. Deep within my soul, the twilight nether lantern reacted. The microscopic drop of samsara resin harvested from Lin Fan's path dissolved, spreading a warm, clear sensation through my mind. My essence sight flared, and the lantern's halo of insight projected a fragmented vision of Wang Tian's internal structure. I saw the destroyed Dantian. Wang Tian had been a foundation establishment cultivator before, but his shattered Dantian was held in some invisible and quiet harmony, yet it felt strangely incomplete. It was as if it was almost there, but something crucial was missing. Within this ruined space, faint, incomplete spiritual lines were beginning to form, resonating with a deep, dormant sword rhythm within his very marrow. Something akin to a forged sword physique. The realization crystallized in my mind. It was the precursor to the shattered sword physique, a legendary sword physique from the annals of history, which could only be built from the absolute ruin of a Dantian. It was currently incomplete, waiting for the missing pieces to come together and forge itself. I looked down at the kneeling youth. I had already formed a successful bond with the Wangs, but Wang Tian's seemingly useless talent was not the end. If I could help him regain his cultivation, I would gain both his and the clan's absolute loyalty. So I decided, even if it turned out badly, how bad could it be? I told Wang Tian I couldn't promise to restore his Dantian or his meridians. I couldn't even promise him ordinary cultivation, nor the glamour of a typical genius. However, if he wished to walk a different path, I would take him as my disciple. I promised him this in the name of White Lotus Peak. It was humble, not among the 9 main peaks of the Heavenly Cloud Sect, but it was a place where we forge our own destiny. Wang Tian did not wait. The fading spark in his eyes suddenly reignited with a fierce, burning light. He bowed his head to the floor once more, his forehead striking the wood with a clear, resonant sound. Disciple Wang Tian pays respects to Master. I would not disappoint Master's promise. Good. In a month's time, when he was in better condition and the Sect competition was over, he should come and visit me there. I handed him a wooden token of White Lotus Peak. We would make it official then. But for now, rest and let the healers stabilize his body. As the healers lifted the exhausted youth to carry him back, Wang Zheng turned to me, knelt, and bowed deeply. Your grace is as vast as the heavens. To take his crippled son under my wing. He led me and Lin Yao behind a hidden bookshelf. Activating a concealed formation, the stone wall ground open, revealing a downward staircase lit by faint luminescent pearls. At the bottom, inside the family's deepest vault, a sealed jade box sat on a stone altar. Carved from dark jade, it was freezing to the touch and decorated with patterns of miniature swords pointing toward a star. For thousands of years, their ancestors preserved this box. Fragmented records hinted they were once a branch of a powerful clan, but none of them had ever been able to open it. It only reacted to their bloodline with a faint glow, but remained sealed. Wang Zheng offered this box to me for taking Tian'er as my disciple. I stepped forward. I did not touch the box, but let my essence sight sweep over it. Deep within my soul, the twilight nether lantern flared, its quiet flame dancing with sudden, intense recognition. This wasn't just an ordinary thing. It was some sort of a key, Through the lantern's guidance and my own knowledge of the lore, I realized this box was a key that needed to meet specific conditions to be used. I told Wang Zheng I would take it. But this box ultimately belonged to Wang Tian. I would study it, but when his path was forged and he was ready, it would return to his hands. Wang Zheng looked at me, his heart swelling with respect. To accept a crippled disciple and then refuse to steal his ancestral legacy. Such character was rarer than true immortals in the cultivation world. I placed the cold jade box into my spatial ring, nodding calmly. Let us return. Meanwhile, in a damp, lightless stone cell beneath the main Wang estate, Lin Fan hung from the wall. Bound in heavy, rune-inscribed suppression shackles, his breathing was shallow, his face pale, in the air smelling of mold and dried blood. He was entirely unconscious. But a terrifying mutation was continuing deep within his flesh. The scattered death chi from the formation, the survival instincts of the heaven-stealing cauldron art, and the residual dragon blood energy were stitching themselves directly into his marrow. Without a dantian, his physical body was becoming the vessel. His bones were turning metallic black. His cells were written to act as an organic furnace. The heavens chosen's path was interrupted, but his fate refused to let him die, warping him into something far more dangerous to overcome his current predicament. The morning sun crested over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the bustling streets of Greenwall City. Lin Yao and I walked toward the city gates with steady, unhurried steps. Our business concluded. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The mission had been an overwhelming success. I had stopped a Heaven's Chosen's trajectory, obtained resources from the said protagonist, avoided conflict, secured the Wang family's secret heirloom, accepted a disciple with a unique sword physique, and established a passive revenue stream. Master, Lin Yao said as we stepped onto the dirt path leading back toward the sect. That boy in the valley. I didn't let her finish. There are many predators in this world, Lin Yao. Some wear the faces of righteous heroes. Some hide behind tragic backstories. She was silent for a moment. So what do? We ensure they never get the chance to be the protagonist of our story. In the cultivation world, talent is volatile. Today it can be there, tomorrow it can be taken away. But what cannot be taken is our path. The path that we walk, the path that we must follow in your journey to the peak of cultivation. The sheer will to survive and execute one's path when all external resources are cut off is what makes someone great. Wang Tian possesses that. That is why I accepted him. And soon he would join our White Lotus Peak and become her junior brother. I smiled faintly, the morning light catching the cold, analytical glint in my eyes. Now let's go home. We had a peak to rebuild. Immediately upon our return to the Heavenly Cloud Sect, I handled the administrative loose ends with efficiency. I submitted the official report of the Withered Valley mission to the Enforcement Hall. The report was a masterpiece of selective truth. I definitely thought so. It detailed the mutated bone serpent, the strange death formation in the basin, and Lin Fan's fall to demonic cultivation. The Enforcement Hall had taken the news of Lin Fan's corruption with grim seriousness. Lin Fan's name was officially marked on the blacklists of every patrol squad. What the report cleanly omitted, however, was any mention of the spoils. The three mystical objects, the calcified scale, the weakened dragon orb, and the crimson blood crystal, remained safely sealed in the deepest corners of my spatial ring, alongside the sealed jade box from Patriarch Wang. To the sect administrators, I was simply an acting peak master who had narrowly resolved a localized crisis and brought back a few common resources. I had sold the mundane beast cores and Redford wolf pelts and the cores from Lin Fan's storage rings to the logistics hall. The payout had been substantial. 25,000 contribution points and a tidy chest of 5,000 low-grade spirit stones. The rewards increased due to my encounter with a demonic cultivator. For a dilapidated outer peak like White Lotus, this was a massive influx of capital. But I knew that spirit stones in a chest did not yield interest. If I wanted to rebuild White Lotus Peak into a secure, self-sustaining stronghold, I needed infrastructure. And that infrastructure had to start with the herb garden. Later that afternoon, I stood on the southern slope of White Lotus Peak. The slope was blessed with a natural spring that trickled down from the higher cliffs, keeping the soil damp and rich with spiritual mist. It was the perfect location for a medicinal garden. Beside me stood Elder Lu, a thin, elderly man from the medicine hall who oversaw the distribution of common seeds and spiritual soils. I offered him a small wooden box containing several pristine, silver-rimmed petals, moonbloom flowers. Elder Lu's eyes widened slightly. He stepped closer, his nose twitching. The yin qi was incredibly pure, untainted by feral blood. I told him I was aware that the medicine hall had been struggling to source high-grade yin herbs for the refinement of the frost essence pills. I had already submitted the bulk of the harvest to the Vermilion Flame Peaks Alchemy Pavilion as a formal contribution, but I kept these seeds and cuttings. I would like to trade them for a standard batch of spiritual soil and a selection of basic fire and earth element herb seeds. Additionally, if the medicine hall ever found itself short of hands to process raw yin herbs, White Lotus Peak had plenty of quiet space and clean air. Elder Lu looked at the box, then at me. A warm, appreciative smile broke through his wrinkled face. He retrieved several jade boxes containing dark, rich soil and tightly sealed seed pouches. Here was the high-grade spiritual soil, along with 3 dozen crimson grass seeds and several cuttings of earth vines. They were sturdy and easy to grow. He paused, lowering his voice slightly. As for my offer, the medicine hall was indeed short-staffed during the season of the Grand Disciple Tournament. If White Lotus Peak had disciples who could handle the cold tempering of raw herbs, he would keep my peak in mind. We were always ready to assist the sect. Phase 1 complete. As the sun began to set, casting long, purple shadows across the peak, Lin Yao walked down the slope to join me. She carried a small wooden spade and a bucket of clear spring water. We knelt on the soft earth, carefully pressing the seeds into the soil together. She worked with quiet diligence, her movements precise. I watched her for a moment, then looked out over the mist-covered peaks of the heavenly cloud sect. The distant summits of the 9 grand peaks glowed like gold in the setting sun, proud and untouchable. For now, White Lotus Peak was small, weak, and overlooked. But the soil was rich, the seeds were planted, and the ledgers were clean. Tomorrow, I would enter my cultivation chambers and begin the true study of the secrets I had brought back from the withered valley and Lin Fan. The foundation was laid. Now it was time to build. The cultivation chambers of White Lotus Peak were carved deep into the basalt core of the mountain, sealed off by a heavy stone gate and basic defensive arrays that Elder Xian had personally established. Inside, the air was cool and still, untouched by the drafts of the outer peak. I sat cross-legged on a worn straw meditation mat. I waved my hand, my spatial ring flashing with faint light as 6 objects materialized, settling quietly onto the polished stone table before me. First lay the golden orb, its surface warm and gold crimson. Next to it was the crimson blood sword, its dark blade heavily coated with toxic black death chi. Beside them lay the calcified, fossilized rock, its rough, gray surface looking entirely ordinary at first glance. Further to the left rested the nether ember pearl, its dark violet surface swirling with cold mist, alongside the pristine, diamond-like death seed. Finally, sitting quietly at the center, was the calcified sealed jade box containing the Wang family's ancestral inheritance key. As soon as the golden dragon fire orb settled near the sealed jade box, the silence of the chamber was broken. A sudden, sharp vibration shook the stone table. The golden orb began to hum violently, a gold-crimson light flaring from its core. The sealed jade box responded instantly. Its calcified surface cracked fractionally as thin, cold arcs of sword-shaped light flickered along its edges, releasing a low, metallic ring that resonated against the walls of the cave. I watched the resonance with absolute stillness, my eyes narrowing. I did not intervene. Instead, I activated my essence sight. For a full day, I sat in silence, analyzing the spiritual blueprints of the relics before me. First, I traced the cold, dark veins of energy swirling inside the nether ember pearl. The bone serpent in Blackwind Canyon was merely a middle-grade beast. It should have been structurally impossible for it to condense a pearl of this quality. The serpent must have nested near or ingested residual death energy that had seeped from the withered valley region. I shifted my gaze to the crimson blood sword. I raised my hand, channeling a pure thread of my white flames to slowly peel back and cleanse the corruption. As the necrotic layers were dissolved and burned away, The corrupted metal of the blade became brittle, crumbling into fine black dust on the table. Nested securely inside the hilt was a teardrop-shaped gem, the crimson blood crystal. The crystal pulsed with a heavy, thick crimson aura. This crystal contained very thin, but genuine, blood essence of a dragon. It was this concentration of draconic blood essence that allowed the relic to elevate the user's cultivation base. But Lin Fan had consumed the majority of it during his desperate struggle. The blood essence was severely depleted. It would need years of quiet chi exposure to naturally regenerate. I was disappointed a bit, but I didn't have any control over that, so I moved on. Next, I looked at the golden dragon fire orb. Its hum was steady, vibrating with a thread of active spirituality that seemed to pull toward the south. The orb's spirituality was connected to somewhere distant. It pointed toward something valuable. This wasn't just a key. It was a spiritual beacon pointing directly toward a dormant dragon bloodline ability, specifically one that governs destiny. I then looked at the calcified rock. I reached out, channeling a stream of pure crimson chi into the fossilized stone. The moment my chi touched the rock, an invisible, absolute defensive shield flared from the bone, scattering my energy with ease. The defense was incredibly strong, resisting my standard core formation strength. I did not force it. Instead, I placed the golden orb and the crimson blood crystal on either side of the rock. The three items resonated immediately. The gold-crimson hum of the orb and the crimson pulse of the crystal began to grind against the fossilized stone's defensive shield like two grinding gears. I seized the window, channeling my coiling chi in a precise manner, following the paths of my 10th perfection cloud-chasing sword technique, directing the pressure into the weakest runic seam. Crack! A fine fissure split the gray, calcified surface. With a sharp pop, the stone casing shattered, flaking away into fine gray dust. Resting in the center of the debris was a single, curved scale, deep crimson, cold to the touch, and radiating a quiet, world-shaking authority that made the air in the chamber feel heavy. A true dragon's reverse scale. I looked at the scale, then at the box and the crystal. A cold, analytical realization settled into my mind. A minor, mundane merchant clan like the Wangs, living on the edge of the Sect's territory, managed to collect 3 ancient dragon relics and a sealed immortal box. I refused to believe they were ordinary. These items were undoubtedly destiny-altering relics, fated to drop into Lin Fan's path one by one through a series of fortuitous encounters, all designed to fall into his hands so he could open the secrets. It was his fated cheat. Too bad. I got them. Holding the scale, the crystal, and the orb, I aligned them in a triangle on the table. The 3 relics clicked together, their runic flows connecting into a perfect circuit. Instantly, a vibrant crimson and gold holographic projection rose from the table, filling the stone chamber with light. It projected the detailed terrain of a secret realm, with a single, pulsing gold coordinate deep within the Blackwind Canyon. The coordinate entered directly into my sea of consciousness. The map was clear. The entry conditions were set. The location of the Thunderfire secret realm was revealed. I closed my eyes, memorizing the coordinates as the holographic light faded back into the items. The keys were deciphered. Now, I knew exactly where I had to go. As the light died down, the 3 dragon relics settled back onto the stone table. Their colors had noticeably faded. The holographic activation had drawn heavily on their remaining chi. I cataloged my findings, recognizing that while the keys were now greatly diminished, they had served their primary purpose. The first part of my preparations was complete. Next, it was time to focus on the other 2 items, the Nether Ember Pearl and the Death Seed. Cold energy crept along the dark basalt walls of the cultivation chamber. I tapped the Nether Ember Pearl with a trace of chi. A thick, freezing mist rolled off the dark violet sphere, pooling on the table like heavy water. This pearl contained a distinct, decaying weight. The Bone Serpent in Blackwind Canyon was a middle-ranked beast of earth element, far too weak to condense a pearl of this quality. It must have nested near the Withered Valley's natural death formation. Over decades, its respiration drew in that residual energy, forcing it to bind with its body. A natural mutation of life and death. Next was the Death Seed. A quiet, diamond-like crystal, it did not hum or emit mist, but silently absorbed ambient warmth and stray qi, converting it into concentrated death qi. In cultivation, death and stillness were the ultimate forms of yin. This seed was a clean conversion engine. If I used this death seed as a blueprint, I could build an array to convert ambient spiritual energy into clean, unpolluted yin qi. If I established this clean yin qi source on White Lotus Peak, the growth of yin herbs in my garden would be unmatched. Frost property herbs were simpler, but true yin herbs were rare and valuable. I could even cultivate an artificial yin seed using this crystal as a reference, creating a perpetual spring of pure yin energy. To a normal cultivator, death qi was a core-corrupting poison. But to me, who held the twilight nether lantern and practiced the nether flame art, it was simply another form of qi. The central plaza of Crimson Cloud Peak was a sprawling expanse of white marble. At the center stood the Contribution Hall, a towering, 5-story structure of dark basalt. I walked through the doors with a steady pace. Behind one of the polished jade counters sat Deacon Gao, an elderly man with thinning gray hair and a permanent scowl, busy stamping record slips. He asked me to state my name and peak. Su Ming, White Lotus Peak. The deacon's hand paused slightly. He glanced up, his scowl deepening as he recognized the acting master of the sect's quietest peak. He asked if I was here to request my peak's basic monthly allocation. No. I retrieved a dark leather booklet and 2 freshly written jade slips, placing them quietly on the jade counter. I was here to submit the refined versions of some of the techniques I had taken from the library during my previous visits. I had optimized their paths to remove the structural flaws. Deacon Gao glanced at the slips. What was this? The refined version of Burning Palm. On my previous visit, I selected the mortal-grade Burning Palm. I found several flaws in its meridian pathways and restructured the flow, bypassing the clogged points. It was now a flawless mystic-grade manual. Deacon Gao pressed his spiritual sense into the jade slip. His skeptical look vanished, replaced by intense focus. The meridian routes were clean, completely devoid of the usual friction points. Rebuilt with a level of precision that bordered on perfection. It was now a solid low mystic-grade technique. Highly refined, the deacon muttered. He picked up the second slip. Another optimized manual. His eyes widened again. And this booklet? The first volume of the 9 Desolations sword technique. Confiscated from a demonic cultivator. It contained the first 3 pages. Deacon Gao frowned. A demonic cultivator's manual? They didn't accept corrupted techniques. It was not corrupted, but it was incomplete and highly dangerous. It siphons the user's marrow and burns blood essence to fuel its strikes. Anyone practicing it directly would damage their foundations within 10 years. I had documented these flaws. I wished to exchange it for points. Deacon Gao pulled the booklet closer. The moment his fingers touched the leather, a cold shiver ran up his arm. The pages radiated a quiet, entropic chill. The deacon's face drained of color. He stood up, chair scraping the floor, and pressed a specialized runic lens to the cover. The lens flared deep golden, vibrating violently. Saint rank. Deacon Gao gasped. A fragment of a saint rank sword inheritance. Nearby elders and disciples turned with wide, shocked eyes. Saint rank inheritances were legendary treasures in this world, incredibly scarce due to environmental decay. Deacon Gao asked if I was certain I wished to submit this. A saint rank fragment, even incomplete and dangerous, was worth a fortune. Many would keep it for themselves. If I couldn't cultivate it safely, keeping it was merely inviting disaster. The sect's archives were the safest place for it. Deacon Gao swallowed hard, nodding slowly. A wise decision. He placed the booklet and the slips into the mystical registry. It glowed with intense silver light as the sect's central formation evaluated the submissions. After a long minute, a series of bright numbers flashed above the jade counter. The payout was staggering. The Saint Rank 9 Desolation fragment alone was valued at a massive 150,000 contribution points. The refined Burning Palm and the optimized movement art were awarded 15,000 points each. In total, a sum of 180,000 contribution points was credited to my token. A massive payout that dwarfed any standard exchange. The points had been transferred. The 9 Desolation sword manual would be locked in the deep vaults of the Scripture Hall immediately. I turned and walked toward the upper floors of the Scripture Hall. Behind me, The hall was already buzzing with whispers. The news of a Saint rank sword fragment submission would not remain secret for long. In fact, deep within the peaks, the elders of Heavenly Sword Peak had already received this news. The name of the manual and the peak master who submitted it began to circulate through the Sword Peak's elders. I climbed to the third floor, where the mystic rank archives were kept. Using my massive points balance, I began to browse the rows of glowing jade shelves. I did not look for powerful, complete inheritances. I did not need them. Instead, I sought inspiration. Specific rungs to build my own ladder. I selected the Yang-Core Ignition Art, a standard, mid-tier flame circulation technique. The Flickering Cinder Mantra, a flame control method that focused on the stability and compression of spark flames. Neither was powerful on its own, but their structural pathways provided exactly what I needed. Next, I visited the sword technique section, selecting 3 manuals. The Wind Riding Sword Stance, which focused on speed and air drag reduction. The Swift Wave Sword Art, which focused on continuous, layered kinetic momentum. The Ninefold Gale Slash, detailing rapid strike repetition. These 3 styles would provide the raw physical motions I needed to synthesize my evolved sword technique. Finally, I took 2 basic defensive spiritual methods. Having secured the jade slips, I left the hall, ignoring the curious gazes of the library guardians, and returned to White Lotus Peak. I walked straight into my cultivation chamber and closed the heavy stone gate, entering deep seclusion. Meanwhile, on the highest peak of the Heavenly Cloud Sect, the submission of the Saint rank fragment had triggered a silent alarm. Deep within the Sect Master's private sanctuary, Sect Master Jun Tianya stood by a stone table. Sitting opposite him was a mysterious visitor, an old man who appeared to be in his early 70s, thin-framed, wearing ordinary, unembellished robes. The old man was quietly sipping tea, his movements unhurried. Yet every shift of his posture radiated the silent, absolute authority of a sovereign. Suddenly, a shadow flickered near the entrance. A cultivator draped in full black cloth, a member of the Sect Master's shadow squad, materialized from the darkness. The moment his eyes fell upon the mysterious old man sitting at the table, his breath caught. He did not dare to advance further. Instead, he dropped to his knees, kneeling deeply, his head pressing flat against the polished wooden floor in a display of profound, trembling reverence. Jun Tianya did not look surprised. He flicked his hand, setting up a soundproof barrier. "Speak." The Shadow Guard reported that just moments ago, the acting peak master of White Lotus Peak, Su Ming, visited the scripture hall. He submitted a Saint rank sword inheritance fragment, the first volume of the 9 Desolation sword technique. Jun Tianya's brows rose in genuine surprise. A Saint rank fragment? From where did he acquire it? According to his official report, he confiscated it from the demonic cultivator Lin Fan during the Withered Valley mission. He warned the registry that the technique was incomplete and siphons the user's life force, choosing to hand it over rather than cultivate it. Furthermore, Su Ming submitted a refined, flawless version of the Burning Palm, upgrading it from mortal to mystic rank. He gave up a Saint rank sword manual? Jun Tianya murmured, a faint, intrigued smile touching his lips. Most cultivators would have hidden it away, trying to decipher it in secret despite the danger. His methods were unusual, and he refined the library's basic palm technique. Jun Tianya turned to the mysterious old man, who was still sipping his tea in silence. "Uncle, what do you think?" This was the youth that Elder Xian left the White Lotus Peak to. The mysterious old man, the Cloud Sword Saint, set his teacup down. He did not know Su Ming. He had never met him, but he knew Elder Xian. His gaze remained calm, like the vast sky looking down upon the earth. But as he listened to the report, a faint, quiet stir of interest entered his clear, ancient eyes. To prove oneself a genius of swordplay was one thing. To possess the cold, analytical clarity to discard a Saint rank inheritance because of its structural flaws, that was something else entirely. The Cloud Sword Saint looked toward the distant direction of White Lotus Peak. "Interesting," the Sword Saint murmured, his voice quiet, final, and absolute. Dawn was breaking over the back of White Lotus Peak. The air was cold and misty, silent save for the low howl of the wind rising from the valleys below. I walked past the quiet pine trees, leaving Lin Yao to consolidate her cultivation in her quarters. I made my way to the solitary cliff at the edge of the peak. This was where my crimson sword manifestation had been born. The stone floor remained scarred with deep, glassy gouges, scorched earth, and cracked boulders. I sat cross-legged on the cold stone, placing my practice sword across my lap. Focusing inward, I ignited the twilight nether lantern deep within my soul. Within my essence sight, a cool, silver-white light manifested around me, casting a silent dome of absolute focus under the sky as the halo of insight descended. A crisp chill washed over my mind, replacing all thoughts with absolute clarity. Holding dozens of complex runic variables simultaneously, I activated essence sight. The misty cliffs faded, replaced by a glowing matrix of raw spiritual lines. The 5 steps of the cloud-chasing sword, the destruction runes of the 9 desolation fragment, and the runic nodes of my library manuals. The 9 desolation fragment appeared as a fractured shard of black glass, leaking entropic energy. I traced the nodes, instructing the cultivator to burn blood essence to fuel a strike. Destruction born of emptiness. It consumes the vessel. Holding the structure steady under the halo, I stripped away the marrow-burning nodes, keeping only the core formula for entropic release. But to fuel it, I needed a different source of power. Using the 5 moves of the cloud-chasing sword technique as the skeletal framework, I began to weave the library techniques into the empty slots under the open sky. I used the principles of the swift wave sword art to loop my chi in continuous, overlapping waves, building momentum within my meridians. I integrated the speed and air resistance reduction of the wind-riding sword stance to accelerate that momentum to its absolute limit. Next, I applied the compression principles I had extracted from the flickering cinder mantra. I did not incorporate the flame properties directly into the sword technique. Instead, I borrowed only its core compression mathematics. Rather than letting the wind and my kinetic energy expand wildly, I forced them inward, coiling the pressure around my meridians like a spring compressed by a massive iron weight. The tension within my spiritual path was immense. Under essence sight, my meridians glowed with a brilliant, compressed white light, vibrating with a high-frequency hum. The cloud-chasing steps provided the coil. The flickering cinders principles provided the compression math. When released, the coiling wind would not merely strike. It would ascend. A new realization, grand and clear, crystallized in my mind. The serpent crawls through dust and shadow, coiling its weight in silence. The wind gathers in the valley, compressing the strength of 100 tempests. When the coil breaks, the earth shakes. The dragon rises from the mist. One strike to pierce the clouds. One roar to shatter the heavens. Boom. An internal shockwave of compressed chi and kinetic pressure exploded within my spiritual pathways and blasted outward into the open air. The solitary cliff vibrated violently. Boulders cracked, and a sudden, fierce gale swept across the terrace, tearing pine needles from the trees. My meridians screamed under the sheer force of the breakthrough as the chaotic, overlapping runic flows of the manuals snapped together, aligning into a single, cohesive, soaring entity. Rising to my feet, practice sword in hand, I did not pause. My eyes burned with a sharp light as I entered the coiling stance. I circulated my chi. Instantly, the wind around the solitary cliff seemed to freeze. The air pressure dropped rapidly as my meridians pulled the ambient energy inward. Using the compression principles, I compressed my chi and the surrounding wind directly into the blade of my sword. The steel began to vibrate. A faint, glowing heat outline appeared along the edges of the sword. The compression was so intense that a high-pitched, screaming hum filled the air, making the stones beneath my feet tremble. I stepped forward, my body moving in a fluid, ascending twist, and struck upward toward the sky. There was no chaotic explosion of fire, no messy blast of scattered chi. Instead, a focused, physical shockwave shaped like a coiling dragon's head erupted from the tip of the blade. A phantom roar, a heavy, low-frequency sonic resonance of compressed wind, tore through the atmosphere. The sound was deafening, a physical pressure wave that made the air itself ripple like water. The sonic wave shot upward. With terrifying, surgical precision, the dragon-shaped shockwave sliced straight through the heavy cloud deck directly above White Lotus Peak. The thick, gray clouds parted cleanly. A massive, circular rift of clear blue sky, spanning several hundred meters, was torn open directly above me, letting a pillar of bright, golden sunlight pour down upon the solitary cliff, illuminating the scarred stones below. Seeing the sheer, majestic force of the strike, I lowered my eyes as the sword crumbled into dust. Instantly, a sharp, burning pain flared in my chest, and my vision swam. I coughed violently, a mouthful of dark crimson blood splashing onto the dry stone floor, sizzling faintly on the heat-scarred stone. My muscles trembled with utter exhaustion, and my meridians throbbed with a dangerous, tearing heat. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto one knee, supporting myself heavily on my practice sword as I gasped for breath. Activating Essence Sight and guiding my inner focus, I saw my spiritual paths vibrating in deep disharmony, but there was a stranger, deeper ache that I could not quite trace. My current cultivation was too shallow to understand the mysteries of the soul. Yet, guided by the cold clarity of the halo of insight, a chilling doubt rose in my mind. Is this damage to my soul? I wiped a trace of blood from my lips. The technique structure was too advanced for my current core formation cultivation. To execute it perfectly and safely, I had to cross the boundary. I had to reach the golden core realm at a minimum. I stared up at the pillar of sunlight, looking at the technique's execution. Only when I had caught my breath did I find the strength to name it after seeing what it had done. Cloud Dragon Sword Technique, Dragon's Roar Break. It was the Cloud Dragon Sword Technique, a direct, natural evolution of the cloud-chasing sword foundation I had spent months perfecting. The old technique had taught me how to step, slide, and strike like a serpent. The new technique had taught that serpent how to grow wings, rise, and roar. Structurally, it was a masterpiece, easily surpassing any standard manual in the Sect. The Sect registry would undoubtedly classify it as the peak of the mystic realm. Its speed, compression, and destructive output had the potential to reach the saint rank. Yet, as I stared at the sky, I felt a distinct empty space at its very core. It was like a perfectly designed, dry riverbed. The banks were built, the stone channels were smoothed, and the path was clear. But there was no water to fill it. It lacks a law. A true saint rank technique requires the integration of a natural law, a fragment of the world's fundamental truth. Right now, this was just an imitation. It had the voice, but it lacked the vocabulary. The phantom roar did not remain confined to White Lotus Peak. The deep, draconic resonance boomed across the valleys, echoing off the surrounding mountains. On the nearby outer peaks, disciples practicing their morning routines stumbled, their ears ringing as a sudden, heavy pressure swept over them. Deep within the forbidden back mountains of the Heavenly Cloud Sect, the mysterious old man sat on a smooth stone, his eyes closed in deep cultivation. A simple, unadorned sword lay quietly across his knees. Suddenly, the sword trembled. A clear, sharp ring echoed from the blade. The Cloud Sword Saint's own sword intent, a path he had created and perfected millennia ago, vibrated in perfect, physical resonance with the distant roar. The mysterious old man opened his eyes. They were clear, ancient, and filled with a sudden, profound focus. He looked toward the distant mist where White Lotus Peak lay. He did not know this young peak master yet, but he definitely felt the resonance. Someone had not just climbed his ladder. They had stood at the top, looked at the sky, and roared back. Interesting. The stone chamber of White Lotus Peak was silent. I sat cross-legged, my mind focused inward. Within my meridians, a dull, throbbing ache vibrated with every cycle of my chi. Activating Essence Sight, I guided my inner vision downward. My spiritual pathways, normally smooth and clear, were slightly damaged. In my soul space, the twilight nether lantern hovered, its silver-white flame extinguished. The twilight nether lantern was a supreme treasure, but it was not free. Its natural fuel was samsara resin, the karma harvested from ending karmic trajectories. When fueled by resin, the lantern operated cleanly. But my reserves were empty. Without resin, the lantern drew from my own soul force, chi, and lifespan as substitute fuel. Forcing the lantern to compile the peak mystic sword technique had shaved decades off my lifespan and left my soul deeply injured, caught up to by the original body's mediocre talent. 30 years and more. I had lost at least 30 years of my life. If I continued like this, my foundation would decay, keeping me permanently at the golden core realm with zero hope of nascent soul. It was a ticking clock. If I could not harvest fresh samsara resin or obtain soul-healing treasures, my journey would end. But despair was useless. To find a solution, I first had to survive by reaching the golden core realm to stabilize my foundation. I adjusted my posture, my breathing slowing to a deep, rhythmic pattern under the halo. I reached into my storage ring and retrieved 2 items: the cold, dark nether ember pearl and the death seed. Placing them on the stone floor before me, I closed my eyes and began to circulate my chi. I chose to deepen my understanding of yin and death first. The cold, entropic energy of the 2 relics flowed into my palms, ice-cold and heavy. Under the halo's passive guidance, I simply let my analytical mind absorb the freezing, silent principles of decay. In the absolute silence of the chamber, a grand realization of yin and death crystallized in my mind, echoing like a silent chant. The frost locks the river, the embers sink to sleep. Death is the silence before the spark. In absolute stillness, the breath of the world returns to the dark. As the chant echoed through my soul, my nether flame art underwent a sudden, qualitative leap. The violet-black flames within my dantian grew darker, denser, and incredibly cold. The entropic chi rushed through my meridians like a torrent of liquid ice. Ignoring the tearing pain in my spiritual pathways, I used this cold, concentrated force to smash against my cultivation barriers. My aura flared. The bottleneck of the middle core formation realm cracked under the absolute chill. 1 stage, 2 stages. But I had hit a wall. The cold was too intense. The death chi, now dominating my dantian, was beginning to seep outward, threatening to freeze my remaining, thinned life force. My fingers grew stiff, and a layer of white frost began to coat my robes. If I continued down this path, I would freeze myself to death before ever forming a core. Yin cannot exist without yang. The cold clarity of my mind kept panic at bay. The end of all things is death, but death is merely the soil from which new life springs. If I understood the absolute cold of winter, I must also understand the absolute warmth of spring. I shifted my focus. Guiding my inner chi in a reverse, coiling pattern, I began to draw warmth from the freezing core of the death seed. I searched not for external heat, but for the tiny, hidden spark of life that exists at the very center of decay. The seed beneath the snow. Slowly, the white frost on my robes began to melt. A gentle, golden warmth bloomed at the center of my chest. It was not the violent, destructive heat of a common fire, but a nurturing, lively light. A second grand realization, the polar complement to my yin mastery, rose in my thoughts. The winter breaks, the silent seed begins to stir. Life is the flame that refuses to die. From the depth of the ash, a single spark rises to meet the sky. The golden yang flames and the violet-black nether flames hovered side by side within my dantian, spinning in a delicate, hostile dance. They were absolute opposites, representing life and death, cold and heat, yin and yang. The moment they touched, a violent shockwave rippled through my meridians, making me cough up a fleck of dark blood. The synthesis was incredibly dangerous. With my soul already injured, any mistake would result in my dantian exploding. But I did not hesitate. I activated the tranquil lotus mantra, my mind becoming as still as a mountain lake, absorbing the chaotic vibrations. I activated the white purifying flames of the lantern, using them to burn away the impurities and chaotic backlashes, cleansing my dantian again and again. I brought the 2 opposing flames closer, forcing them to overlap at their very center. I was not trying to make one conquer the other. I was seeking the common origin of both. A final, unified realization crystallized in my awareness, binding the 2 halves into a single, sovereign truth. Before light and shadow split, before the world took shape, neither hot nor cold, neither living nor dead, yet holding the potential of all flames. Yin and yang returned to the origin. At that moment, the golden core barrier, which had stood like an absolute mountain before me, shattered completely. Boom! A loud, world-shaking spiritual boom erupted within my soul and blasted outward, vibrating the heavy stone walls of the chamber. The shockwave blew the dust from the floor, sending a ripple of golden and violet-black light expanding across White Lotus Peak. Within my dantian, my old, cracked spiritual core shattered into countless glowing fragments under the force of the boom. But instead of dispersing as chaotic energy, the fragments were pulled inward by the newly formed, unified runic pathways of my scripture, spinning faster and faster until they condensed into a single, pristine sphere of absolute balance. It was a pristine, balanced golden core of yin-yang fire. One half shone with the deep, cold violet black of the nether flames, while the other glowed with the warm, radiant gold of the yang flames. Alternating runes of life and death, spring and winter, swirled along its surface, spinning in perfect, perpetual motion that hummed with world-shaking power. I had crossed the boundary. I had stepped from the mortal realm of core formation into the true mystic realm of the golden core. I opened my eyes. The violet-black light in my pupils had deepened, now carrying a faint, golden rim at the outer edge. I breathed out a long plume of warm, white mist, feeling the sheer, massive power hum through my restored meridians. The immediate crisis was resolved. By forming the golden core, I had locked in my foundation, stabilized my damaged meridians, and halted the decay of my remaining life force. For the time being, I was safe. Yet, as I scanned my soul, I could still feel the deep, quiet ache. The 30 years of shaved lifespan were gone forever, and the injury to my soul remained a silent shadow. The path to the nascent soul realm was still blocked. I named the new cultivation technique I had compiled the Origin Flame Scripture. Structurally, it was a masterpiece of absolute balance, easily classified as the peak of the mystic realm. I stood up, my robes fluttering as a gentle breeze swept through the stone chamber. I had bought myself time, but I couldn't afford to remain passive. The Heavenly Cloud Sect was a nest of vipers, and White Lotus Peak had been bullied and overlooked for far too long. If they believed the acting peak master was weak, they would continue to plot in the shadows. The Sect tournament was coming. A low-profile approach was useful when building a foundation, but to secure resources and deter enemies, one must show their fangs. I resolved my next steps. I would use the upcoming outer and inner Sect tournament to create a massive scene. I would announce my arrival and the rise of White Lotus Peak to the entire Sect, leaving them with no choice but to recognize our power. I would make it clear, through absolute, overwhelming force, that no one would ever bully me or my disciple again. White Lotus Peak was no longer the garbage dump of the Sect. Once my position within the Sect was completely unshakable, I would set out to find a long-term cure for my soul and lifespan. A faint smile touched my lips as I stepped toward the door. The game had changed. I was no longer a weak handyman struggling to survive. I was a proper golden core cultivator, having stepped away from the mortal realm of cultivators into the mystic realm. And the Heavenly Cloud Sect would soon have to learn my name. The stone chamber of White Lotus Peak hummed softly, vibrating in sync with the rotation of my dantian. Guided inward, my consciousness watched the yin-yang golden core rotate. It was a pristine sphere, split like a Taiji diagram. Deep violet black on one half and radiant gold on the other, wrapped in tiny runes of life and death. With every rotation, it refined the thin spiritual chi of the peak into dense golden core spiritual energy. I had crossed the boundary from core formation into the golden core realm, moving from a simple gathering of chi to a self-sustaining miniature chi pool. With this perfect yin-yang balance, my chi pool had expanded to a near-limitless capacity. More importantly, I no longer had to consciously perform chi circulation. The dual forces in my dantian rotated entirely on their own, allowing me to cultivate passively at all times, even while resting or walking. Furthermore, this perpetual cycle of life and death, growth and decay, had granted me a powerful passive healing factor. The minor tears and strains in my meridians were already stitching themselves together automatically, healing without my active intervention. I opened my hands, my eyes flashing with a split violet gold light. Now, let's see the changes in my techniques. Normally, the Crimson Sword manifestation allowed me to manifest 3 ethereal swords of fire. In core formation, they had been simple condensed flame chi weapons. Now, circulating the spiritual energy of the origin flame scripture. The technique had evolved into 3 distinct, named sword manifestations. I focused on my left. With a soft whoosh, the first sword materialized. The air immediately turned freezing cold, a heavy chill spreading rapidly across the floor. This was the nether flame sword manifestation. The blade was entirely violet black, coiling with dark, entropic chi. It carried no physical heat, but rather a chilling concept of absolute decay, designed to freeze the life force and spiritual pathways of anyone it touched. I smiled slightly, then focused on my right side. With another soft hum, a second sword materialized. Instantly, the chill melted away, replaced by dry warmth. The second blade was bright gold, radiating a light as pure as the morning sun and pulsing with dense life force. This was the Yang Flame sword manifestation, born from Yang and life, carrying a purifying life-sustaining heat. With the dark, freezing sword and the bright, warm blade hovering on either side, the chamber's temperature split down the middle. Now came the true challenge. The third manifestation. Drawing energy from both halves of my core simultaneously, I attempted to weave them together, manifesting the third, unified sword in the center. The stone chamber trembled as the yin-yang origin flame sword manifestation took shape, flickering violently between violet black and golden light. Crackling sparks of violet-gold spiritual electricity arced off it, burning glassy scars into the stone walls and distorting the air. Its destructive power was easily 5 times greater than the other 2 manifestations combined. However, this third manifestation was still highly unstable and could not be maintained for long. Within 3 seconds, the blade vibrated violently and cracked. I immediately dispersed my chi, dissolving it into harmless sparks. I exhaled a long breath, wiping sweat from my forehead. The yin-yang origin flame sword manifestation was incredibly powerful, but it required too much control. I could only maintain it for a few seconds. This was my next ace in the hole. If I could learn to stabilize the fusion, it would be my ultimate trump card. I dismissed the swords and turned to my soul space. Connecting with the Twilight Nether Lantern, I found the connection vastly improved. In the past, using Essence Sight or the Halo of Insight felt a bit heavy and tiring. With my golden core, the passive energy consumption was less, allowing me to maintain analytical vision for much longer without fatigue. Yet, the underlying soul damage remained. While my passive healing factor was excellent at mending physical meridians and flesh, it could not reach these deep soul wounds. However, the discovery of this passive regeneration sparked an idea in my mind. If I could consciously direct this coiling flow of life and death energy, I could develop or learn a unique yin-yang healing technique to heal others by balancing their internal life force. I evaluated my mental state next, focusing on the Tranquil Lotus mantra. The mental mantra was near perfection, its calming effects having anchored my mind when the yin and yang flames clashed during my breakthrough. But I also realized something else. A mental stabilization mantra and healing pills were not enough. My soul was injured, and my lifespan was depleted. Simply patching the leaks with external resources was a temporary solution. If I wanted to walk further on the path of cultivation, I needed to look into soul cultivation soon. A proper soul cultivation scripture was exceedingly rare, far rarer than ordinary cultivation manuals. Most sects did not possess one. I would have to keep my eyes open for such a technique. Suppressing these thoughts, I decided it was time. My 1-week seclusion had concluded. I had consolidated my golden core, stabilized my injuries, and mastered my new techniques. There was no need to remain in the stone chamber any longer. I stood up, my robes rustling. I dusted off my sleeves and walked toward the heavy stone door. With a wave of my hand, the defensive formations dissolved, and the stone door ground open, letting in the bright, warm sunlight of White Lotus Peak. He walked out onto the mountain path, breathing in the fresh, clean air. The peak was quiet, the wind rustling through the bamboo forests. As I walked down toward the courtyard, I heard the sharp, rhythmic sound of a sword cutting through the air. Swish, swish. I followed the sound, arriving at the training clearing behind the main residence. There, Lin Yao was practicing. She wore her simple, white disciple robes, her long hair tied back. Her face was flushed with exertion, and sweat beaded her forehead, but her eyes were filled with absolute focus. The iron sword in her hand was a blur of silver light as she executed the forms of the cloud-chasing sword technique. I did not interrupt. I activated Essence Sight and the Halo of Insight, watching her movements. I was deeply impressed. Lin Yao was still at the peak of the Qi condensation realm. However, her physical execution of the technique was flawless. Every step, every twist of her wrist, and every lunge was perfectly aligned. She transitioned between the forms seamlessly, with a natural grace. She had mastered the technique to absolute perfection. Her fundamentals were so solid that her body moved by pure instinct, her strikes carrying a heavy, natural momentum. More importantly, she had obeyed my command. She had not attempted to force a breakthrough to the Foundation establishment realm, despite her cultivation being at the absolute limit. She had spent the entire week refining her foundation, making her vessel as strong and stable as possible. Lin Yao finished her final form, bringing the sword to a sharp, motionless halt. She took a deep breath, and as she wiped the sweat from her face, she noticed me standing at the edge of the clearing. Her eyes lit up, and she immediately sheathed her sword, running over to bow respectfully. "Master." I had emerged from seclusion. Her voice was filled with joy. Then, as she looked up at me, her breath caught. Even though I was suppressing my aura, the natural pressure of a golden core cultivator was still faintly visible. My eyes carried a deeper, more profound light, and my presence felt as solid and unshakable as a mountain. "Master, congratulations on the breakthrough," she said, her voice hushed with awe. I smiled gently, stepping forward and nodded. I told her she had done well. She didn't rush her breakthrough, and her sword forms had reached the 10th perfection. Her foundation was incredibly solid. Lin Yao blushed slightly at the praise, bowing her head. She only followed my instructions. A solid foundation was the key to steady cultivation. Now that I had emerged, it was time for her to take the next step. Lin Yao looked up, her expression eager. How shall she begin? I did not answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my storage ring and retrieved the ice-cold nether ember pearl and the dark death seed, placing them in her palms. The sudden chill made her fingers shiver, but she held them firmly. "Hold these." Her cultivation was strong, but to form a stable foundation, she must balance it with the silence of Een. Don't let the cold conquer her, and don't let her heat burn it away. I stepped closer, my index finger glowing with a faint, violet gold light. "Close your eyes." Lin Yao did so, her breathing slowing as she trusted me completely. I pressed my finger gently to her forehead. A jolt of ice-cold energy flowed from my finger, entering her temple. It was accompanied by coiling paths of warm yang qi, carrying the refined pathways of the Crimson Flame mantra and the conceptual understanding of the Nether Flame art. Lin Yao shivered, her body tensing as the dual concepts of life and death, spring and winter, settled deep within her soul space. "Quiet your heart." My voice echoed in her mind, deep and steady. "Let the Een guide your path." I withdrew my hand, watching Lin Yao sit down on the grass, her breathing stabilizing as she began to digest the massive influx of knowledge. The stage was set, the nether ember pearl and death seed resting in her hands. She was ready for her upcoming breakthrough. The moment I withdrew my glowing finger from her forehead, Lin Yao's tensed frame sank cross-legged onto the grass. The sheer weight of the transmission hit her soul space like a physical impact, forcing her eyes shut as her breath caught. In her left palm, the nether ember pearl immediately flared with an entropic, violet chill. In her right, the dark death seed sat heavy, drawing the warmth from her fingers. A quiet, colorless mist of pure cold began to roll off her skin, a side effect of the extreme Een properties settling into her pathways. Under the halo of insight and essence sight, no details missed my senses. The moment her skin made direct contact with the two Een anchors, the dormant, curled-up shadow deep within her meridians gave a sudden nudge. It was not a gentle awakening, but a sharp, shifting contraction. Deep within her dantian, the ancient shadow stretched, siphoning the raw cold of the pearl and the seed to condense and take a proper, distinct shape. A faint, feathered silhouette of something dark and ancient. A sharp, searing agony shot through Lin Yao's chest, as if a freezing blade were twisting inside her core, scraping against her narrow pathways. Her teeth ground together, her muscles locking in a rigid shiver as cold sweat broke out on her forehead. The pain was suffocating, urging her to drop the stones and break her focus. But she did not move. She did not open her eyes. She knew I was standing right there. She had the utmost, unwavering belief in me. If I told her to hold her pain, she would hold it as much as possible. If I was watching over her, she was safe. I stepped back, quietly settling onto a smooth stone opposite her. My expression was calm, but my divine sense was fully expanded. Through essence sight, I watched the glowing map of her meridians. I saw the shadow's sudden contraction and the sharp spike of pain in her aura, my eyes narrowing slightly. The transmission I had delivered was a massive influx of knowledge for a qi condensation cultivator. Lin Yao's face remained pale, but she held her focus, relying on her absolute trust in me as she harmonized the dual currents. Within her body, the cold, deathly qi of the nether relics and the warm, lively qi of her natural vitality were coiling around each other like two snakes, searching for balance. Do not force them. My voice drifted through the clearing, calm and carrying a natural weight that instantly settled her racing mind. Let them flow. Her meridians had been prepared by flawless practice. Trust her body's natural pathways. Don't build a wall. Build a riverbed. Lin Yao took a deep, shuddering breath. Guided by my words, she relaxed her tight control, letting the coiling currents seek their own paths. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders faded. The wild, erratic vibrations of her qi began to smooth out, flowing in a deep, rhythmic cycle that matched her breathing. The nether ember pearl in her hand began to glow with a faint, pulse-like violet light, while the death seed released a thin, black thread of deathly energy that seeped directly into her palms. Hours passed in absolute silence. As the sun reached its peak, the spiritual qi of White Lotus Peak began to gather, drawn toward the clearing like water to a drain. A light breeze stirred the bamboo, rustling the leaves as the atmospheric energy pressed against Lin Yao's physical form. The bottleneck of the foundation establishment realm was approaching. In normal circumstances, breaking through from qi condensation to foundation establishment was a process of compressing gas into liquid. A cultivator had to force their gaseous qi into a single, dense pool within their dantian. If their foundation was weak, this compression could rupture their meridians. But Lin Yao's foundation was at the 10th perfection. Her meridians were wide, smooth, and resilient. As her gaseous qi began to condense, it did not clash. Instead, it flowed naturally toward her dantian, coiling around the cold nether flame seed that I had planted. However, the addition of the nether ember pearl and the death seed introduced a massive surge of yin element energy. The sudden influx of cold threatened to freeze the condensing qi, locking her pathways. I opened my eyes. I did not rush forward to take control. Instead, I extended a single thread of my purifying white flames, letting it hover gently over her dantian. I did not force her qi into any specific pattern. Rather, I worked with her natural energy flow, using my pressure to nudge the freezing currents away from her main meridian junctions, guiding them safely into her dantian. Her path was her own. A master can guide the banks, but the river must carve its own way. Under my gentle guidance, the freezing qi settled. Suddenly, a strange phenomenon occurred. Under the passive scanning of essence sight and the halo of insight, I saw Lin Yao's entire spiritual aura flicker. For a fraction of a second, the violet-black mist surrounding her body shifted, turning into a brilliant, pale light that was incredibly pure and ancient. Deep within her soul space, a faint, translucent imprint of a phoenix, wings spread in silent majesty, briefly materialized before vanishing back into the shadows. At the same time, the primordial shadow within her dantian, now holding a clearer, feathered shape, fully stabilized its new form. It greedily inhaled the concentrated yin and death energy radiating from the nether ember pearl and the death seed, the dark presence solidifying its outline as if it were absorbing natural nourishment. My heart skipped a beat, but my face remained a mask of absolute calm. The earlier blob of shadow, which I was almost certain was a phoenix, was reacting, and the shadow had taken shape and stabilized. The Yin energy flame, Qi, was awakening something that had been locked away for a long time. But her physical vessel was still too weak to bear the full weight of this inheritance, and the shadow didn't seem fully ready to wake up yet. I adjusted my golden core pressure, weaving a thin, protective barrier of warm yang qi around her dantian to soothe her, letting the stabilized ancient presence settle back into quiet dormancy. With the ancient shadow now quieted, the breakthrough reached its climax. Lin Yao's gaseous qi condensed completely. With a silent, internal pop, the barrier of the Foundation establishment realm shattered. But her breakthrough did not follow the ordinary path. Instead of the simple, clear liquid pool of a standard Foundation establishment cultivator, Lin Yao's dantian underwent a qualitative change. The liquid qi that filled her dantian was a dark, cold violet black, coiling with faint golden runes. The temperature of her spiritual pool was ice cold, yet it did not freeze her. Instead, it throbbed with a terrifying, entropic vitality. She had achieved a qualitative mutation. She was no longer just channeling fire. She had gained the ability to freely manipulate and shape the violet-black nether flames at will. The breakthrough stabilized. Lin Yao's eyes snapped open. A faint, violet-black flame flickered in her pupils before vanishing. She stood up, her body lighter, her presence carrying a cool, quiet pressure that was remarkably advanced for a new Foundation establishment cultivator. Amazed by the power humming through her limbs, she looked down at her hands. "Master, I did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Yes, she did." I stood up from the stone. I looked at her, my expression warm but carrying a nod of approval. Her foundation was flawless. She had surpassed the ordinary limits of Foundation establishment. I told her to show me her progress. Lin Yao nodded. She reached down, drawing her iron sword from its sheath. She did not circulate ordinary qi. Instead, she drew upon the cold violet-black pool in her dantian. Instantly, a silent, violet-black flame ignited along the length of the iron blade, the cold fire distorting the light around it. She began to execute the forms of the cloud-chasing sword technique. Her movements, which had been flawless in the qi condensation realm, had now transformed. Every strike left a trail of cold, violet-black light in the air. As she reached the final, crowning form of the technique, the ascending serpent surge, which was normally a rising, coiling lunge of crimson gold sword qi, she did not execute the standard movement. Instead, she combined her 10th perfection sword mastery with her new ability to manipulate the nether flames. Lin Yao lunged forward, her iron sword tracing a coiling, rising arc flush. A silent, massive wave of coiling violet-black fire erupted from the blade. The flames did not form a simple serpent. Instead, under her will, the violet-black fire morphed and coiled, condensing into the soaring, freezing silhouette of a massive dragon that roared silently as it ascended. The grass in its path did not burn. Instead, it was instantly coated in a dark, glassy layer of chill, its vitality locked in entropic stillness. The strike was silent, beautiful, and absolutely lethal. It was a unique technique, born from her own comprehension. Lin Yao brought her sword to a halt, the violet-black flames on the blade vanishing back into her meridians. She looked at the frozen path of grass, then at her sword, her eyes wide with shock. "This," she muttered. She didn't plan to do that. The flames just followed the sword.